Good evening, council colleagues, town staff, and members of the public who are watching our live stream this evening. I'd like to call our regular council meeting for Monday, January 25th to order. I'm Mayor Cliff McNeil-Smith, and joining me here in the council chamber is Councillor Scott Garnett. And our five council colleagues are joining us via Zoom. You can see them on your screen on the live webcast. And good evening to Councillors Wainwright, Duncan, Rintoul, O'Keefe, and Fallett. Members of staff participating in the meeting, you won't see them on video, but unless they're on Zoom, but you will hear their audio if they're in the chamber. Good evening to our CAO, Randy Humble, our Director of Corporate Services, Andrew Hissick, our Corporate Officer, Sandy Nelson, our Director of Engineering, Works and Parks, Jen Clary, our Senior Manager of Long Range Planning, Corey Newcomb, Senior Manager of Current Planning, Alison Verhagen, and our Fire and Rescue Chief, Brett Mickelson. I'd like to respectfully acknowledge that we're holding this evening's meeting in the territory of the Wasanic Nation. And before I turn to approval of the agenda, just a couple of things, late items to add. Council will have received additional correspondence from ARTC further to their presentation last meeting. And that will be added under item 12A, recommendation number 1. And we have an additional letter of correspondence regarding the tennis pickleball, which is item 14F. And we also, on our agenda, will have Councillor Duncan provide a council report. And I just want to note at this time that we do have a lengthy agenda this evening, as council colleagues are aware. And I will be calling a recess at approximately or close to 8 o'clock for a short time to give us a little break. So I would now look for a motion to approve the agenda.
Move approval of the agenda as amended.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Call a question. All in favor? Not opposed. That motion carries. Thank you. We'll then move to public participation, and public participation is by electronic means as we continue through the pandemic. And we do have one speaker, which I'll turn to in just a moment. And then we do have 4 items of correspondence that Mr. Humble will read out to council and the public. So I'll first confirm that we have our speaker, Megan Ariser from Buds Cannabis Connect. Good evening, Megan Ariser.
Hi. Hello.
So we're in public participation now, and you have the floor for 3 minutes.
Okay. Well, my husband and I just wanted to introduce ourselves. And when we were putting in the application, we were on the fence about what we were going to do with the front display window. And we've come to the conclusion we are going to have local artists post their artwork as a free space. And rotate it every 2 to 3 months, depending on the wait list. So I have a couple people waiting now and a few pieces of art there. And that's our new plan for what we're going to do to create it as a safe space so children can't see in and have a public display. So I just wanted to let council know that. And here's the other half to say hello.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So I don't want to take up much of your time. I know you guys are very busy. So that's all we needed.
Well, thank you for joining us this evening and that additional information. And we will be reviewing that later on our agenda. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Good night. I'll next turn to Mr. Humble to go through the 4 letters that we've had submitted.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the first correspondence that I'm going to read is from Octavio Cruz. He's a marine data researcher with Pocatchin First Nation. He's provided a background letter and then a notice that I'll read out following the background letter. Dear Sydney Council, please find attached a public notice as required by Transport Canada for a no interference to navigation application. This notice is required for installation of marine work which will not interfere with any marine navigation activity as per Transport Canada regulations and is to be delivered to the public. Pocatchin First Nation will be installing a remotely operated Ocean Data Acquisition System, or ODAS, BOY, within Coles Bay, adjacent to Pocatchin First Nations reservation land. The ODAS BOY will assist Pocatchin First Nation in rapid marine response in the event of a localized oil spill, will increase detection speeds for blue-green algae blooms, and will monitor water quality within the bay. Further information can be found at the following website, cps.canada.ca, and under registry number 2021-503695. I'll read the notice, Mr. Mayor. It reads as follows. Pocatchin First Nation hereby gives notice that a submission has been added to the Common Project Search online registry pursuant to the Canadian Navigable Waters Act described herein and its description. Pursuant to paragraph 4.1 and 9.1 of the said act, Pocatchin First Nation has deposited with the Minister of Transport on the online Comet Project Search Registry and under registry number 2021-503695 a description of the following work: an ODAS, or Ocean Data Acquisition System, BOY. In, on, over, under, through, or across Coles Bay Saanich Inlet at Inner Coles Bay, in front of lot number Pocatchin First Nations Coles Bay Reservation land, posted at Victoria, British Columbia, this 22nd day of January 2021. And it's from the Pocatchin First Nation.
Thank you. Thank you to Octavio Cruz for bringing this to council and the public's attention, and we certainly wish you every success with the work as it commences.
Second piece of correspondence that I have, Mr. Mayor, is from Chris Crane, who I believe resides at 9840 Fifth Street, and it reads as follows. Topic 4C1 new bus stop location. As we are presently living at the Beaufort, which is located at James White at 5th, we have a vested interest in what is happening with transit. The buses have increased far beyond the capacity for this minimal area. Hopefully, the planned new bus stop at James White and Resthaven will help with the congestion and, of course, limit the amount of pollution which results from the idling of the buses outside of the Beaufort. The second proposal at James White and 5th southbound would definitely not be feasible, as the 7 Beaufort retail units would not have any street parking available to them, and access to the Beaufort residential units would be impeded. The town of Sydney has many new business and residential units, open bracket, far too many, close bracket, under construction east of 5th Street that common sense should prevail, and the buses should be continuing east on Sydney Avenue, not turning south on 5th Street. Parking is limited in Sydney, and just one example, the patrons of the new movie theatre would certainly be appreciative of available public transportation. The retail owners on Beacon Avenue, especially from the waterfront to 5th Street, would appreciate having this Sydney transportation service extended for their customers.
Thank you, Chris Crane, for bringing that input to council's attention.
The next piece of correspondence is from Jack Gollop, and he resides at 204-9840 5th Street. Sir, I have lived at the Beaufort Condominium Business Complex at 9840 5th Street since 2011. For most of that time, I have been the president of our Strata Council. During that period, our council has received numerous complaints about the bus stop at the corner of James White, 5th Street. The most frequent have been, number 1, buses parked at the stop and idling for extended periods. The practice has produced excessive amounts of exhaust fumes from the vehicles, which has impacted the air quality of our residents who live on the north James White side of our building. As many of our residents are elderly, this practice has periodically had a negative impact on their health. Our council has contacted BC Transit on this issue. They have cooperated with us and the situation has improved, but it has not been completely eliminated. 2, smoking. A municipal bylaw exists that forbids smoking in public areas that includes the bus stop. As well, our strata has a bylaw that prohibits smoking on or within our property. People continue to ignore these regulations. Cigarette butts are found on a continuous basis around the bus stop and on our parking lot. I spent 38 years as a member of the RCMP. One of the most effective crime prevention actions that the police can provide are foot patrols. If police/bylaw officers could make periodic foot patrols on our property, I know that it would have a positive effect. 3, disturbances. There are a number of businesses on the ground floor of our complex. Periodically, they are disturbed by disputes at the bus stop and the shouting of obscenities. The latter is a criminal offense. Again, foot patrols would have a positive effect on this problem. I appreciate that the bus stop has to go somewhere and to optimum effect. Our council would strongly oppose the placement of another bus stop adjacent to our building. Ideally for us, the existing bus stop would be moved away from our building. If possible, these bus stops should not be in proximity to a residential complex.
Thank you, Jack Gallup, for bringing those several comments to Council's attention.
Finally, Mr. Mayor, I have some correspondence from Mr. Ray Hunt, who I believe is the owner of a commercial strata unit at 2355 James White Boulevard. Item on agenda 4C1, new bus stop location. I am the owner of unit 2355 James White Boulevard, the Beaufort building. I strongly support addition, as soon as possible, of one or preferably 2 temporary bus stops on James White Boulevard at Resthaven Drive. This is item number 13B staff report. Not only does it lessen confusion/blocking of access to the driveway at the Beaufort building, it also reduces diesel engine pollutants in the building whilst buses are idling at the existing bus stop. This is becoming a considerable health concern, especially in summer. Hopefully e-buses will soon rule the roost. That concludes the correspondence, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Ray Hunt. We certainly hope for e-buses as well, and thank you for your submission tonight. That brings public participation to a close. And I'll now turn to presentations. We have 3 presentations this evening. The first, and I'll just confirm before introducing that our presenters are connected. Levi Meganburr and Lisa Trotter from BC Transit. If you can just confirm you're connected by audio.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening. So we do have a presentation from Levi Meganburr, Senior Transit Planner, Work Lead, and Lisa Trotter, Senior Manager of Government Relations with BC Transit, regarding a new bus stop location for the James White Boulevard at Resthaven. And we look forward to your presentation. You do have 10 minutes on the virtual floor, and we look forward to you taking our questions after the presentation. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for having us here today. I understand it's been a while since BC Transit has presented to Sydney's Council, so really excited to be here today and to give you an update. Just a quick overview of the BC Transit model as a refresher, and then to speak briefly to the some of the challenges we've been finding at the existing stop at James White at 5th, and some opportunities that we've been exploring with your local staff for finding ways of improving some of these challenging situations. Just to confirm, are you sharing my presentation on your end, or do I need to share screen?
You need to share your screen. We have a copy of your presentation, but for the public, you would need to share your screen.
Excellent. Let's do that.
Thanks for asking.
Okay. So to start with, I'm actually going to turn things over to Lisa Trotter, my colleague, to just give a brief overview of the BC Transit model and how that works here in Victoria.
Thank you, Levi, and thank you, Mayor and Council, for having us here today. It's a pleasure to be here with the Mayor and Council at Sydney. I'm fairly new to the Victoria system. I've been with BC Transit for 5 years, but new in my role over the last year as a Senior Manager of Government Relations. So I work very closely with the Victoria Regional Transit Commission. And of course, BC Transit's model does operate through partnerships. So the Victoria Regional Transit Commission plans the community and establishes the transit priorities and routes. They set the service levels for the entire Victoria Regional Transit system, approve the budgets. They set fares across the community and provide local tax subsidies. So they do the tax requisition through the commission, through property taxes. And then another portion of transit is paid for by motor fuel tax. And then, of course, this is part of our shared services model across British Columbia. We're one of the few governments in Canada that the province picks up a good portion of the cost of transit in the province. So BC Transit, as a Crown corporation, turns the Victoria Regional Transit Commission's priorities into transit operating plans and capital plans. We also work with the province to access funding for transit service as well as capital plans. We operate the Victoria Conventional Service and manage the capital program, and then we contract out the Handy Dart service. You could switch to the next slide, please, Levi. And in terms of municipal collaboration, we work with municipalities across the region on planning policy, development decisions that support density nodes and corridors, so for transit-oriented development. Of course, the municipalities, they are in charge of the roads other than the highways that are run by the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. So we collaborate on any decisions around infrastructure for multimodal transportation. The bus stops and shelters are the responsibility of the municipalities. We work with them through our bus stop shelter program to help finance some of the shelters, but certainly the infrastructure and roadways are the municipalities. All the municipalities can send in, if they have development in their region, development referrals to BC Transit, where we will try to provide advice for transit in that development. We also do engagement with First Nations in the community, residents associations, citizens, and answer any customer concerns or give updates and information to those associations. And of course, we collaborate with the Ministry of Transportation Infrastructure on any highway infrastructure or bus shelters and stops. And with that little update, I'll turn it back to Levi to talk about the specific matter at hand with James White and Fifth.
Thanks, Lisa. So as Lisa mentioned, bus stops and bus stop infrastructure are the purview of the local government. So we have been having some challenges with the existing James White at Fifth bus stop, I would say probably for the last several years. And as we heard from some of the public support and feedback, we have been working with Sydney and the residents over time to help improve the situation. But of course, there's still some outstanding challenges that we've been working very closely with your local staff recently to find some resolution and steps forward on. So just for a little bit of background and context, the James White at Fifth stop, it's a really critical bus stop within your system. Right now, it's really the only stop within the Sydney area that allows for layover and recovery for local transit serving the area. So it's that key terminus and layover location for local transit in Sydney right now. So really critical. And then in terms of capacity, so currently there's space for about 2.5 buses. What we've been finding is there's a number of times throughout the day on weekdays and occasionally on weekends as well, we're seeing situations where 3 or more buses are trying to access that zone at the same time. Oops. And as we heard from some of the public, and as we hear from our operators and through consultation with your local staff, this is an ongoing challenge that we need to find opportunities to improve, both for the residents' sake and from a transit operational perspective, to help make things easier and more effective moving forward for providing transit to your community. In the attached report, you'll note I think it's about 6 times a day on weekdays with our last schedule where we're seeing 3 or more stops or 3 or more buses at that stop, and that's without even accounting for the existing Route 72. So it's possible that it may actually be more often than that as well. So this is just a quick street view capture from Google, just showing the context there. You'll see at the back of the bus zone, there's the driveway for the residents at the Beaufort residence. And so this is what some of the residents were speaking to, that sometimes when there's the 3rd bus there, it extends past and blocks that entrance to the parking facility for the building there. So in collaboration with local staff at Sydney, we assessed a number of different options. These were the 2 that ended up on the short list. We did assess a few other options previously and settled on these 2 as potentially feasible options. So the one that emerged as the most as the best option essentially from the 2 was the James White at Rest Haven stop, flagged there on the left of the map. And this was for a number of reasons. First of all, as we heard from a number of the residents, we've had quite a bit of correspondence from the residents of that building in the past, and we do recognize that the residents of that facility currently do not want to see more transit at that location if at all possible. Also, putting the stop around the corner there would require the removal of additional parking. So it would take at least 2 parking spaces away rather than the one at the other location. And also the turn radius is a bit tight for some of our 40-foot buses to make that turn and serve the bus stop effectively. So although it could be operationally feasible, it's not as easy from a service accessibility perspective. So you can see here on the slide, this is the just a street view snip from the preferred option at James White Boulevard at Resthaven Drive. So this proposal will really just help ease the capacity constraints we're currently facing at the existing stop. It's not going to 110% address all of the issues we see at that stop at all times, but it will definitely help reduce the pressure in the short term. In the longer term, as we look to continue to expand service within the Sydney area, we do need to look at options for a longer term facility within the Sydney area if we want to continue to grow transit service to your community. And so something that will actually be coming back to your council in the coming months to discuss further is the Peninsula Local Area Transit Plan, which is a planning process we started this month. And we've been collaborating with local staff with Sydney, Central Saanich, and North Saanich. And really that process we feel is an ideal opportunity to look at a longer term facility to help increase capacity for transit moving forward. And there may be the potential to leverage some shared funding to help improve, potentially check off a number of items, both from a multimodal perspective, streetscape improvements, and transit capacity improvements as well. So stay tuned. We'll be continuing to work with your local staff, and hopefully we'll be coming back to council in the coming months to give some updates on that process. So in terms of recommendation, we recommend proceeding with implementing that additional bus stop on James White Boulevard at Resthaven to address some of those immediate capacity constraints, and then as well to continuing to work with local staff with Sydney to look at some of those longer term opportunities in the future. So with that, I want to thank Mayor and Council again for having us here today, and we're happy to answer any questions the Council may have.
Thank you for your presentation and for the slides this evening. I'll turn to colleagues. If you could perhaps take your presentation down, your slides down, it just enables me to see my colleagues a little easier. Thank you. On a speakers list, I have Councillor Fallett, Councillor Garnett, and Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you very much for the presentation this evening. That was very good. And Sydney is experiencing growth, as are most areas, and one of the prime issues that we keep hearing is increased bus service. And that comes at a price, and I'm not necessarily talking dollars. That comes to a convenience and quality of life and everything else that goes with it. I did go online to BC Transit website just to look at what you're doing as far as your fleet and the types of buses, the fuel and whatnot. Could you talk a little bit more, because from the sustainability aspect of the environment, and what you're doing to reduce the emissions and the impact. Obviously, when we've got buses that are stopped for a length of time at a building, whether it's resident or commercial, you're going to have an impact, probably more so on residential. And when buses are idling, the sound of it, as well as the fumes, what is BC Transit doing to address that?
Certainly, I think that I could answer that question through the mayor and chair. Thank you so much for that. BC Transit certainly wants to make a difference when it comes to GHG emissions and to reducing pollution and taking action towards climate action. And we are aiming to meet the goals of British Columbia's Clean BC. And we're doing so by transitioning our vehicles into eventually electric, but in the interim, CNG and RNG fueling. So we've recently started transitioning those buses over. So you'll see a huge number of our fleet are now CNG and we use RNG where we can. And we've transitioned our Langford facility site over to be able to fuel those. We do recognize that doesn't fully answer what people would like in terms of low fuel emission buses. So we have 10 battery electric buses coming to the Victoria region 2022, and we have made a commitment to no longer buy heavy-duty diesel buses going forward and have a transition plan to eventually work towards the full electrification of our fleet. Of course, the other consideration too is as we grow transit services, that every time we get people out of single occupancy vehicles and onto buses, that's 40 less cars on the road, and that certainly helps the overall picture as well. So I hope that begins to answer your question.
Okay. I mean, that's part of the issue. The other one, obviously, is the inconvenience of having the buses stacked in an area that is reducing parking. But on the flip side, if you have more buses, hopefully then you'll have less use for the parking spots. So, I think this is part of the process moving forward of how do we address those problems and how do we get the best bang for the buck? How do we get the best benefit at the least inconvenience? But at some point, we are going to have to inconvenience people, unfortunately. So thank you. That answers my questions for the time.
Thank you, Councillor Fallett. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Megenber and Ms. Trotter, for your presentation. I just have two questions. One, when I looked at the proposed spot at James White and Resthaven, I noticed that there was a faint redness under there. So was this a previous bus stop at some point in time? And if it was, why was it switched?
That's a great question. So through the chair, I'm not aware of that location previously serving as a bus stop. That being said, like Lisa, I'm a bit newer to the system. I've been working in Victoria for about the last year of my 5 years with the planning team here at BC Transit. So it's certainly something that we could look into. I know bus stops do have a tendency of changing and shifting around over the years, so it's certainly possible. But I'd have to look into that and get back to council.
Thank you. The other question is a question to you as well as, I guess, my own staff through the mayor. With regards to moving it to in front of 2349 James White Boulevard, given the concerns that the residents at 9840 have had, has there been any reaching out to the residents of the building where the proposed spot is meant to be going?
Jen, did you want to start, or did you want us to start?
Sure, we can start. Through the mayor to Councillor Garnett. I guess Sydney Town staff have not reached out at this point. If council would like us to, we could, and if council doesn't have objections to this, which staff support, we could notify. However, there is need for an additional bus stop here. So it would be more of a notification if council are supportive of this bus stop.
And just to add to Jen's comments as well, the proposed new bus stop would function as a bus stop, not as a recovery and layover location. So the idea with the new stop is that we can pull some of the routes that just sort of flow through Sydney, so that we can preserve the existing capacity at James White and 5th, the current stop, for that critical layover and recovery, and pull the service that's really just trying to pick up and drop off passengers within the area as a way of reducing the number of buses that need to access that spot at the same time and the conflict between the different uses. So it's likely that any bus stopping there would be stopping for 30 seconds to a minute or two if there's a mobility aid being loaded, and it would be there and gone and not sitting there laying over for an extended period of time as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it wouldn't be a bad idea to notify them, just because if they don't follow council meetings minutes or they don't partake in what's going on, just so that it's not a big surprise and they get all panicked about, well, hey, why is this here all of a sudden when we had no idea it was coming? So that's just a thought I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. I'll turn to Mr. Humble.
Yeah, just through the mayor, I just wanted to add to that. I think certainly notification would be reasonable. The only concern that we'd have is around expectation. If we do send notification, I'm just not sure if there's going to be an expectation that there's going to be an opportunity to pursue other options, because, as noted by the transit presentation, there are very limited options associated with where a temporary bus stop could go. So it's just something to be cognizant of around the notification process.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Humboldt.
Thank you.
I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe, and
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the presentation. And my question also had to do with consultation and engagement, and you've sort of answered it in this particular case. But I'm wondering, in general, what is the process? So when we're planning to make changes, and it looks like there might be changes in the future as we look at future plans. And so I'm wondering, is that the responsibility of BC Transit to take that on, or is that something that would be a town responsibility to gather feedback?
That's a great question. So through the chair, it sort of depends on the context. When it comes to bus stop infrastructure, usually because that falls within the purview of the local government jurisdiction, we would usually support the local government in terms of notifying or engaging on that particular issue. When we're talking about planning initiatives like the Peninsula Local Area Transit Plan that we're kickstarting this month, when we go to do public engagement as part of that process, BC Transit will lead that, soliciting feedback from the project working group, which is of course comprised of staff from Sydney, Central Saanich, North Saanich, and it'll be a very robust engagement process. We'll have a pretty extensive marketing and communication plan, social media, bus stop posters, interior bus cards. So we will be promoting it pretty heavily, both using traditional advertising means and also more modern like social media and other venues as well.
Right. Okay, thanks for that.
thanks, Councillor O'Keefe. I just have a couple of questions, and it really has to do with the layover aspect of that use at that location. And I guess a couple of questions. One is, how long do buses typically lay over? And is there a particular reason that they're layover at that location? Now, I do appreciate, I remember it was many years ago, the Beaufort development, when the Beaufort development was brought forward, the town went through a process with BC Transit to have that restroom installed, and of course that's, I'm sure, an important part of a layover. But could you speak to layover a little more broadly?
Certainly, yeah. So through the mayor and chair, layover and recovery is a critical part of any properly functioning transit system, both from a schedule reliability perspective, but also from driver shifting and operational needs perspective as well. So in our schedules for every route, we always build in a certain amount of something we call recovery time. So at the end of the line, we have a bit of extra time in the schedule in case it encounters traffic congestion or other issues on the road. It's able to have a bit of a buffer before it needs to leave on the next trip, so that we're able to maintain our schedule. So that's one piece of it. And then the other piece as well, because of the way we put all of the trips together, we block them together for one vehicle to operate. Sometimes there's a bit of inefficiency in there, and so sometimes a bus needs to wait before it's able to depart on its next trip. So that's another piece. And then the final piece is just allowing drivers time within their shift to take a break once in a while, to use the bathroom, to have their lunch, to switch over, to have another driver take over. So there's a number of different reasons why that space is really critical. And so I hope that that's helped answer your question. If you have any follow-ups, I'm happy to speak in greater detail to any of those elements.
No, it does. Thank you. And I guess the comment is, and I'm sure it's reviewed by transit, is, that is in our downtown. It's in a busy location, residentially and commercially. A fairly busy intersection, not our busiest, but one of the busier ones. And I know we have the McTavish hub, not too far away. If there were restroom facilities there, is consideration given to layover? It seems that layover in a busy commercial residential area, if you could move it to a less busy area like the McTavish hub, or even one of the less busy transit stops. Is that been considered?
So through the chair, it's a great question. I mean, ultimately, we design our services in a way that serve the areas of greatest transit potential and density. And so we can always explore opportunities to move transit farther away from the central areas, but that does add operational costs to the system. So for example, then we're paying a driver to drive, 5 minutes one way to take a break and then 5 minutes back to get to where it needs to start service again. So there's that cost and implication. And also, the less we prioritize transit within our dense cores where we're seeing that ridership, the less priority we're really providing to multimodal transportation within a given community. And I think given some of the ambitious sustainable targets that both the region and our municipalities have been setting, I think that we really need to work to increase the purview of transit to help move the needle and allow us to achieve the mode share targets that the CRD and a number of our local governments across the region have set. So it's really a matter of priorities. We can always look at other opportunities, but if we want to move the needle from a sustainability perspective, you just need to trade off those different considerations.
Well, thank you very much for taking that question. I'll turn to colleagues one more time. Seeing no others, I want to thank Mr. Megenber and Ms. Trotter for your presentation and taking our questions this evening. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Good evening. And that is coming up, as Council knows, but for the public, is coming up later on our agenda as well. We'll turn to our second presentation. I'll just confirm that our two presenters, Mr. Brad Edgett and Ms. Morgan Shaw, are connected.
We are here?
Oh, yes, you're together. Here we are. So just a brief introduction, presentation by Brad Edgett, President and Board Chair of the Sydney Business Improvement Area Society, and Morgan Chair, the Executive Director, on a request for funding for a Business Development Manager. You have the virtual floor for 10 minutes, and we'd be pleased if you would take our questions following the presentation.
Of course. Thanks, Mayor, and thanks to Council, and thanks to staff for allowing us the opportunity. As you've seen in the package that Morgan sent you, we're here to talk a little bit about a business development management position. It's certainly been identified that through the EAC that a long-term and a short-term economic recovery is going to be needed in Sydney. And so through some work that Morgan has done with our members, they've identified that they would need some business development help as well. And so that brings us to the presentation today. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Morgan, and then she can tell you a little bit more about what the plan is, and then we'll be happy to answer your questions.
Thanks, Brad. So in essence of time, I understand that the agenda is full tonight, so I will keep my verbal report short, but happy, of course, to answer any questions and to direct at that time. My name is Morgan Shaw, and I'm the Executive Director of the Sydney Business Improvement Area Society. We're thankful to be able to bring this request to your attention tonight. We've determined over the past 11 months, hard to believe we're almost at a year with COVID, that this position that we are coming to the town for support and partnership on is a necessity for not only to the society, but also to the town of Sydney. We've been working alongside the town through originally the Emergency Operations Center, with local community groups, the Chamber of Commerce, and of course with our business community. Lots of new navigation with COVID, of course, and with that has come a demand on our services that hasn't necessarily been needed in the past. So the diversity that we are expected to and hoping to maintain in terms of support and resources to not only our membership, but also to the entire business community in Sydney is becoming something that we aren't necessarily able to fill, or I'm not able to fill in my sole position as Executive Director. With that, it was my recommendation to the Board of Directors in the fall that we expand our staff team to include a business development manager. And with that, we were fortunate enough to be able to hire a staff that had been working with us for the past 4 years through the BIA, Shannon Tubin, who's just recently completed her master's degree in public administration. So effective January 1st, the Sydney BIA brought on a business development manager to work to provide support and resources to businesses and sectors who may be struggling through this time or need some additional support in navigating COVID. The establishment of this position was to fill a gap that we were seeing in our current operations through the BIA, and quite frankly, it was just becoming too much for me to be maintaining and managing off the side of my desk from the role of executive director. We've seen so many organizations come together through this process of COVID. We work closely with the South Island Prosperity Project, the Saanich Peninsula Chamber of Commerce, the BC Economic Development Association, and so on. We're seeing so many resources and support come from these organizations, but what we've determined need is a point person to be able to distill that information and those resources that are coming down through those organizations and more, distill it for our community and what our community needs and the sectors within our community. Some businesses are faring just fine and some are not. So to be able to answer those questions and those needs for support is really what the angle of this position is. So that is what we are here, and you'll see that in the report that was distributed earlier. But we're here to seek your approval and support in what we and the board have deemed to be a necessary component for recovery and resilience for COVID-19 in Sydney.
A couple of quick things to add. From the BI's perspective, this is something that our members have seen that they want, and so it's something that the board decided to support Morgan to move forward with. And so we felt it like a good opportunity to involve the full and all of Sydney as opposed to just our area. Hence why hiring a new person to specifically do this job, where the allegiance just doesn't lie to the BIA. If you think about it this way, it'd be very difficult for us to do a strategy like this and then tell somebody maybe 2 blocks over that, I'm sorry, we can't give you this information because you're not in our area. It doesn't seem right to do that. So we're looking at partnering up with certainly council and the town of Sydney to transition these 2 strategies that we deem to be necessary. So we'll take questions now if you have any.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. I'll turn to speakers list. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett first and Councillor Wainwright. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Edgett and Ms. Shaw, for your presentation. A couple of questions. One, just to clarify, so the funding you're asking for, you've already hired the person, it sounds like?
That's correct. So we've hired the position, and the BIA will be moving forward regardless as to this partnership. But the idea behind the funding is that we've hired for essentially what it is 1/3 of Sydney businesses that fall within our area or within the BIA district. And the proposal tonight is to expand those services to meet the needs of businesses that are
Ms. Shaw,
Ms.
Shaw, if I could just interject for a moment. Could you come closer to the mic, perhaps? Just
Yes.
so we could hear you just a little better. Thank you.
Did you catch what I?
If you could start again in your answer, that'd be helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
So this position we've hired for the position, and we are moving forward in delivering services. We've started on what that position is offering to our membership. The proposal tonight is to expand the position to provide support for businesses outside of the Sydney BIA district or area. So support for at-home businesses and all businesses who hold a business license within the town. So we have been increasingly seeing, I would say since late summer, early fall, the call on the BIA from businesses that are not within our area. And of course, I'm not in the business of turning anybody away, but also in the interest of levy paying members, it gets a little bit difficult because we do operate on a tax levy. So we do have to keep our membership at the forethought there. So the idea of this would be a partnership with the town to allow for expanded services through this position.
Thank you. Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, yes, if I may, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, sorry, one more question. And you probably kind of answered the question a little bit already, but I'm just seeking a little more clarification. So I've spoken with Mr. Hissick, and it'll be just under $321,000 that the town will be accumulating on your behalf in terms of levies this year. And I was looking back at an annual report from 2018 that the SBIA put out, and under BIA 101, which is good for me because I'm not up on the term that much. So, but it says that BIA funds are used to hire staff and implement BIA initiatives. So the question I have, and I had the same question for your predecessors, which they never answered, is how and since the town, you're asking money from the town, which is a taxpayer, $60,000 a year for 3 years, I believe. Why is that not able to be taken out of the levy for an initiative as opposed to coming out of town coffers?
So it is coming out of the levy. The position is fully funded through the levy. This position is simply expanding what the position is encompassing. So the position has already been hired. It's already in motion. It's simply saying from the town's perspective that it's a point person that would be able to provide support, resources, and communication to businesses outside of the district. So does that answer that question?
I can ruminate on it for a bit. I'll let some other members ask their questions.
Maybe I can just clarify, Scott, just Councillor Garnett. So just so we're clear, the BIA will be using the levy funds to pay for this position, regardless if the town is going to join us or not. What the collaboration between BIA and the town allows us to go outside of the levy paying members.
Okay.
And it just, from our perspective, it just seems a sensible choice. So we collaborate with all of Sydney as opposed to just our 350 members that we have. As Morgan's pointed out, she's not in the business of saying no to anybody calling, but we also have to honor our levy-paying members as well. So it would just expand the area. And from a board's perspective, when we look at renewal, I can't speak to when we do that, but depending on the board at the time, there has been talk around the board table of expanding the area when we look at renewal. And so to cover, West Sydney and Harbour Road as well. So it just seems like it could be a natural fit. And hopefully that maybe answers the question a little bit more.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett, and for the answers. So I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright and then Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got a couple of questions. I've also got a comment. One of them is regarding our OCP process. And I guess we're expecting that we will be looking to the business community to get some input on economic aspects. And this position that you've created, and particularly if you're expanding it beyond just the BIA downtown area, looks like it would have the potential to actually help us with that OCP review process. And I'm just wondering if that might fit within the scope of what you're proposing, because that would add a lot of value to what you're proposing.
Yeah, I can answer that. And great question, great point. And it's something that unfortunately low-hanging fruit, and we didn't include in the proposal, but was certainly implied that certainly Shannon, that would be a key role for her from a standpoint of doing right away. It's the OCP review is coming up as we speak, and it gives her a good opportunity to get the feeling of businesses and provide feedback to council and to staff, and that would be absolutely one of the first things that she would be doing for sure.
Okay, thank you. So this kind of segues into my second question, but I can very much appreciate the issue that you have where you get an inquiry from someone who's very similar to a business in the BIA area, but they're outside. And if you honor your levy-paying members, you should turn that individual away. So if the town contributes to expanding the scope, you don't turn people away, and that's great. But we are going to have similar, if you do that and you cover all of Sydney, we're going to be covering West Sydney, and across the road, less than half a block away, there will be people who would benefit, and you're going to have exactly the same issue. And I guess if Sydney does proceed to expand this, have you considered approaching North Saanich, who have COVID restart money, and saying, on a pay-for basis, would you kick in so that we don't have to say no?
It is quite frankly, it's not something that we've brought up. Of course, it's in theory, it's you're right on the money there. We have had quite an extensive conversation with the Saanich Peninsula Chamber of Commerce, and we've been able to work towards mitigating some of those issues that may come up. I don't want to call them issues. You know, we're in the business of supporting businesses. So the chamber at this time is open to providing additional support through this potential role. The business development manager, Shannon, would work directly with a liaison from the chamber to ensure that those businesses that may come, as you say, just across the road, but perhaps in a different district or area, that they would receive the assistance that they need. But I do think that there is the potential to reach out to North Saanich, certainly if that is an abundance of, if there's an abundance of support necessary.
Okay, thank you. So I'd just like to, I guess, end with my comment. I do have some concerns about the proposal that's presented, and you didn't, for example, mention that you've already got a person for the position and that sort of end of things. But when I look back at what we accomplished in the past year for economic support, the town really, I can't point to anything that wasn't actually done by the BIA or the chamber. So it's, from my perspective, it's better to be doing something than doing nothing. And even if this isn't perfect, I would not want to see the pursuit of perfection interfere with simply getting something done. So I expect that it's going to be an interesting discussion, but that's kind of the perspective that I'll be bringing forward. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wainwright. Turn to Councillor O'Keefe and then Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. I'm still sort of going back to Councillor Net's points about the funding of the position. So the way that I'm understanding it, so it's currently a full-time position, is that correct?
Correct.
So in the fall, you made the pitch to the SBIA board that you needed a full-time position to meet the needs of your members.
Correct.
And so I guess what I'm struggling with a bit is, if you already have identified that you need a full-time person just to deal with the downtown area, how, if you take on, like, you've already identified that that's required. So I'm not sure, how are you going to take on double the amount of businesses and provide level of support to all of them?
Yeah, it's a good question. I wish that we had a full team to be able to respond to all that there is and all that there is to come. I would say that the majority of the work that the BIA is doing, it overlaps in terms of sector specific or the information that we're receiving through aforementioned groups. So to be able to take that information, distill it down again, and be able to offer it to the community as an opportunity to utilize, that's where we see the fit for this. So, you know, while we do receive individual requests for support from some businesses or small businesses specifically, the idea of this is that, you know, we've got, as I said, SIP, the BC Economic Development Association, all of these organizations that are working so hard to provide resources and to provide support, that we need to have a point person to come forward and say, okay, you know, I attended the EAC meeting, this was referred, here is how we can bring it to, whether that be Harbor Road or across the highway, these types of things where it might be sector specific, that the answer is. Do you have anything to add to that?
If I can just through the chair, add, Councilor O'Keefe, just double the businesses doesn't mean double the work. And what I mean by that is, as Morgan's put it, we're going to be collecting and disseminating all this information. We want the opportunity to be able to share this information with all of Sydney. So picking up another 50% of the businesses doesn't mean that she's going to be working, you know, another 50% harder. There are a lot of similar sectors, as Morgan has just pointed out as well. So, you know, I think we've identified that it is within her scope to be able to tackle all of these businesses. If we're proven wrong there, then we'll have to look at another strategy. But certainly, when we distill it down, it is enough work for one person, whether we have 350 or 700 businesses.
So, yeah, I get that. I guess the other aspect of it that I have a bit of concern about is the other sectors. When we, council, as you may recall, provided money to the SBIA a couple years ago for a number of different projects. And there was concern at that time about, you know, that the focus would be too much on the downtown area. And it turned out that that was the case, that that's where the focus was. And I'm a little bit concerned with this again, because, you know, I note that the focus has been identified on focusing on the hospitality and tourism sectors, which is basically, you know, downtown businesses. So I wonder, you know, we've got things to get done in the marine sector, the industrial sector, home-based businesses. What sort of plans do you have in order to support those areas?
Do you want me to go ahead? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Through the chair. Thanks, Terry. Councilor O'Keefe. So yeah, we've identified in the proposal that there certainly we have identified that there's a lot of service sector businesses that will need our support as well, and a lot of the you know, the industrial industry as well will need our support. You know, I was on the board of the BIA when the proposal was. We did the pilot project in 2018, and then Donna and Susan came and presented in January of 2019. This proposal is very different than that, and the focus is not just on the downtown or what we would call service sector or hospitality or tourist businesses. You know, I think that there's going to be all businesses in all sectors are going to need our support. So the danger is not just to focus on one sector of business. The danger is we're going to be focused on all of sectors. We need to, because they all need our help. Yeah.
Now, thanks for that. So as you know, council at EAC's recommendation is going to be considering hiring a contractor with some expertise in economic development to help the town develop a long-term economic development strategy. So I'm trying to figure out, is what you're proposing to address that? Are you proposing this position as the answer to that, or is it a separate thing from that? And if it's separate, like how would they, I'm just trying to figure out how those things align. If you could give me a bit more on that, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. I think certainly the differentiators with with this proposal and with this position is that it's the support and the resource providing. So it isn't an economic development officer. It's not a contract position in order to find out more research. For Harbor Road and for West Sydney, you know, of course there needs to be meetings there. Data needs to be collected from those areas to see what the needs are right now. But it's really, this position is to fill the gaps. And what we're seeing through the BC Economic Development Association, for example, we need to be building intention projects that come from within the community. So it's working towards ensuring that our business community remains strong. We've seen Sydney has been insulated, certainly from our hospitality sector, with the exception of accommodation providers. We've seen quite remarkable numbers in our commercial downtown area. So this is a more pointed approach in providing assistance and resources to those businesses who need it most. And when we're receiving information through the various committees that we sit on and the groups that we're associated with, we need to ensure that it doesn't just stop with a presentation at SIP or coming out through a publication. It needs to go right into the hands of the business owners who are just trying to make it through right now. And those perhaps that are faring well, they need it too. You know, we need to ensure that our business community stays strong. We are made up of small businesses primarily, and so we're trying to fill the gap. I would say for businesses who are maybe not as inclined towards certain areas of support that's being offered through COVID.
So just to, I'll try and just to bring it to close. So do you think it's a good, do you see us doing both things? Like, so is it a matter of, do you support the development of a long-term strategy, and but this position would be there to sort of facilitate that? Or, and I'm just trying to figure out how you see all that working out.
Brad knows this, and I think that I'll pass it over to Brad, but certainly in sitting and reviewing the many committees that this has come up through, I would say, A, this position is different, and B, we would support the development of an economic strategy for Sydney, but the idea, and I think Councillor Wainwright put it best, you know, to do something is better than to do nothing. It doesn't have to be perfect, but we see these strategies emerge, and there's a laundry list of actionable items, but we're at the point, especially with COVID now, that we need to take action. The BIA has been working very hard over the past 11 months in campaigns to maintain support and structure for our businesses, to attract locals when we can, and in the summer we were able to attract BC residents. But you know, this is to fill a need that is happening right now. So different approach from that. But I'll throw it over to Brad because he said on.
I think I understand.
Maybe just clear it up just a little bit more, Councillor O'Keefe, through the chair. Thanks. I think the best way to describe it is this position is going to be action oriented. So it may fill the long-term strategy, it may not. I think that's to be determined. This position is going to hit the ground running like it already has, and we may find that it is it may replace the contractor that EASA was talking about. It may not. I don't think we know yet. If it serves the purpose and is working well, then that would be our recommendation, that position works with the EAC and not have to duplicate it. We may find out that we need duplication, but until we start doing it, until we start actioning, we won't be able to tell. And you know, I have a gut feeling, but I think that this position will go a long way to help work on this long-term and short-term strategy.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll leave it. I have some other questions, but I'll leave it there for now and allow my colleagues a little bit of airtime. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks very much, Mr. Edgett and Ms. Shaw, for your presentation and the information that you circulated in advance. I commend the BIA for being, proactive. You've addressed a need in the current climate, referring to the pandemic, where capacity was short to be able to accommodate this type of assistance to your members. And so to you and the board, my congratulations for filling a void that's there. And you've taken it a step further by suggesting that with the town's participation, it'll give this individual the latitude to expand their scope of service into other areas of our business community that have been without this type of resource. And I concur with what Councillor Wainwright has said, and Ms. Shaw, you echoed, and that is, maybe it's a starting point, maybe it's not perfect, but we could sit here and pick it apart or do that later tonight, and certainly be no further ahead. Obviously, this is overdue, and how we can dovetail it to the benefit of the larger Sydney business community is certainly of interest to me. I would encourage you, to work through the position you have with respect to the EAC, and I know, Brad as chair is certainly familiar with the intent, where the EAC has requested budget funding in 2021 to help develop a long-term economic strategy. A basis for which the town can work forward to. I think it sounds to me like the work this individual will be doing and their qualifications likely suit very well for that person to potentially serve in that capacity, as opposed to the town duplicating its expenditure, looking for a dedicated contractor to help in that process. So I'd encourage you to revisit that, and when we see this item later this evening, I'm certainly going to look as part of the motion to refer this to the EAC for their input and insight as well. So no questions there, just comments, unless that led to any further thoughts from either of you, Brad or Morgan.
Thanks, Councillor Rintoul. No, I think that's well said. Thank you for that.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no other speakers, I have one question. We know there's over 800 business licenses in the town of Sydney. Don't recall the exact number. And we know over 350 of those businesses are in the downtown business district, and they are on commercial premises. I can't remember the number exactly, but it's something in the neighborhood of 150 to 200 are home-based businesses, which are not in commercial districts. They're in home-based. And so my question is that I kind of see the business community three ways in a sense, in one perspective, in that we have the downtown business district, we have the other commercial districts, if you will, and then we have the home-based businesses. I can see how this business development could serve the other commercial business sectors. Is your intention to serve the home-based business sector as well?
Without question. All businesses will be included. We've been approached by numerous home-based businesses for support, even if in a general information sense. Again, it comes back down to the majority of our business community, and that's part of what makes Sydney so wonderful. We are a business community made up of small businesses. It gives Seaside Sydney its charm, but in the same breath, we've got people that are we've got people that are wearing multiple hats, and especially as COVID has drilled down, we're seeing people that don't have perhaps, whether it be the expertise or even just the time to be able to navigate the resources and the support, or find the point person that they need to be able to navigate what the current business landscape is. So certainly all of the resources that are determined by this position will be available not only to home-based businesses, commercial businesses, but we'll be working in close partnership with the Chamber of Commerce to ensure that members through their channels are also taken account for. part of this position will include research and data, collecting information, which will go hand in hand with a potential economic development strategy that's down the way. But all in all, the position is really to serve the entirety of Sydney's business community. So that will be the hope for all licenses.
Thank you. I'll turn to colleagues one more time if there's any further questions. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Just one more about governance issues. So you've mentioned, the SBIA has, allegiance to its members and its board of directors. And so I'm wondering, how will strategies and recommendations and decisions be made each year? And I guess, how can we ensure that, the needs of home-based businesses and the marine sector and industry are going to be met? If you're hearing from your members that they need, already you've identified a full-time position, and if you have limited resources, how will you be able to, who will make the decisions? Would it be the SBIA board? Would it be the EAC? Do you see the town have any role in identifying priorities each year?
We see this position as a full collaboration with the town of Sydney. So coming through the EAC table is probably the most functional way to do it, if that is permissible through the town, and that's the decision that's made. The board of directors through the BIA will maintain the HR side of things in terms of the employment, but certainly from the goal of the position is entirely collaboration. It's to best suit the needs of the business community. We have of course our finger on the pulse of downtown Sydney, but without working with the chamber, without working with West Side groups, without working with Harbour Road, it wouldn't meet satisfaction. So I would say that certainly from an EAC perspective, we've already got those people around the table. There's already opportunities for communication there, and to take direction from that would likely be, in my opinion, the best source. Brad, I'm not sure if you have.
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit. Thanks again, Councillor O'Keefe, for your question. We have precedence on this working with the town of Sydney through CAG, where all CAG members are not members of the BIA area. And so, we have an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, with the town of Sydney, and, different reporting models. And we would follow a similar reporting model with this position as well, whether it be through the EAC, whether it be through the town. But yeah, I think that there would be an opportunity for the town of Sydney and the council to have a finger on the pulse, knowing what is going on, so you're getting the answers to the questions that you need answered.
Okay, thank you. I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Brad Edgett and Morgan Shaw, thank you very much for bringing this forward and your presentation and taking our many questions this evening. We appreciate it. You have seen it later on our agenda tonight, and we look forward to deliberating further on it at that time. So thank you again, and good evening.
Thanks to Mayor, Council, and staff. We appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.
We have one more presentation, and Brad Edgett, I see, has stayed on the line, as it were, and with another hat on as Executive Director of the Memorial Park Society Mary Winspear Center. Mr. Edgett would like to give a little presentation on it, or an update, I'm sorry, on the performing arts.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and thanks again to staff and council. You get a double dose of Brad. That's pretty rare. Lucky you. You can all mute your mics or mute mine if you want, but I just want to have a couple of opportunities to say a few things. I had a great meeting with Mr. Mayor last week regarding the Stage 1 report, and I'm not sure if you've all had the luxury of reading it yet. For those of you that haven't, it is a report that was done over the last year with the CRD about the performing arts and venues. And I just wanted to provide a little bit more clarity to the mayor. And I know this topic came up last Monday, and I thought it important to maybe provide a little bit more background from a venue's perspective on what's going on in the world today. I know I've had the luxury of dealing with former Councillor Lovelace with this issue, and Councillor Fallett, you and I have had a number of conversations about the CRD and their arts strategy. You may be surprised that maybe my attitude has changed a little bit as I grow older and wiser. But I think a couple things to point out from a regional approach. We've been very, very involved in the province from an arts and culture perspective, obviously over the last 20 years here, but certainly with COVID, we have taken an active role in being leaders in the performing arts through COVID times. My theater manager, Phil Sutton, sits on the BCTC task force. He's actually chairing that group, really working with a lot of the other venues, providing them as much information to get them back to opening and providing entertainment for the region. I'm sure you followed what we did here. Thanks to your support, we made the national news on being one of the only venues that was providing entertainment starting July 14th, running right through until basically December the 5th, and will continue when we're allowed. But I think what concerns me is the regional art approach when we look at from the venue's perspective. I really like the opportunity of having a regional approach as long as that's what it is. I'm sure, I think it was Councillor Wainwright, I had the opportunity of watching the last Monday's meeting, and I think it was Councillor Wainwright that pointed out that, when you're not participating from a regional approach, the grants that are given from the CRD, the venues or the grantors who are getting the grants, they are told they're not able to use those funds for our venue. And I have a huge issue with that we're trying to support the regional arts and culture as a whole, and you're telling smaller arts organizations that could use our wonderful space here that they're not able to use that grant funding because you don't have a seat at the table, you don't have a voice at the table. And I think it's important that if we're going to pursue this regional approach, that you do have a voice at the table, that you do speak loudly for arts and culture in our region. There's a huge economic impact of what arts and culture brings to the town of Sydney and to the peninsula as a whole. And, these smaller organizations that can't fill the Royal, that can't fill the McPherson, these upstart companies, these upstart groups need a place to come. And for us to not even be considered because we're not at the table, I find that really offensive. We provide an amazing service here, thanks to your support and the support of North Saanich, and we run an amazing, amazing facility, world class in a small little peninsula of 33,000 people. So I just wanted to provide a little background as to what we've been doing on the provincial stage outside of the CRD, but also from the national stage. I've been in a number of national meetings with international as well, discussing our operations and how we've been able to make this work through the COVID situation. There's a lot of things that we've implemented here that we will take through outside of COVID, discovered some new ways to do business. So I just wanted to provide a little bit more information on what we're doing outside of the CRD from a venue perspective. Now I'll take any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Brad. Any questions from colleagues? Okay, seeing none, certainly appreciate that update, Brad Edgett, and continued success. And thank you for keeping us and putting us on the larger maps, Sydney and the Mary Winspear Centre. Thank you.
Well, we couldn't do it without your support, so thanks to Mayor and Council and staff. So thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
That concludes our presentations this evening. I'll turn to, sorry, I just put my agenda package back together here. I'll turn to bylaws, and we have bylaw number 2207, building regulations, amendment number 11, and a report from staff, and I would ask staff to introduce, please.
I'll refer this to Ms. Verhagen, who I believe is on the Zoom call.
Good evening, Ms. Verhagen.
Good evening. through the mayor to all of council, this bylaw is proposed to correct an error that was inadvertently made with the adoption of bylaw 2204. That was a bylaw that was adopted to add in the waiver of fees for building permits related to weather protection of outdoor seating for food service businesses. A few other fees had inadvertently been removed from the fee schedule in that bylaw, so this bylaw is proposed to correct that mistake. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Verhagen. And we do have, we can proceed this evening with 4 motions for readings and adoption if we choose.
I'll move that bylaw number 2207 be considered for first reading.
Second.
All those in favor? None opposed, motion carries.
I'll move it for second reading.
Second.
Discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? None opposed, motion carries.
Move third reading.
Second.
All those in favor? None opposed, motion carries.
Move adoption.
Second.
All those in favor? None opposed, motion carries. Thank you, staff. Thank you, council. We'll now turn to adoption of minutes, and we have the regular council meeting minutes of January 11th.
Move adoption.
Second.
Second, any errors or omissions? All those in favor? None opposed, motion carries. Thank you. I'll turn to the mayor's report, and I have 4 items to speak to tonight. The first, which shows on the agenda, was the meeting that Brad Edgett referred to that he and I had approximately a week ago. And while we've had discussion through Committee of the Whole and earlier last year about the Arts and Cultural Service at the CRD, which is with regards to arts programming, the CRD, as I reported out last year, in late 2019, and the committee really didn't get started until early 2020, created a select committee for the review of arts facilities in the Capital Regional District. And I was appointed, as a CRD director, was appointed to that committee representing the peninsula, and Brad Edgett referred to the final report. That report was received at a committee meeting approximately a week ago. The reason I haven't brought it forward to council, but it's certainly available on the CRD website, or I could forward it to council, is because committee at committee we had an update from, or sorry, we had a presentation by the consultant. There was 189 arts facilities consulted with, as well as stakeholder engagement during the process. It's a lengthy report with 4 very significant recommendations. The committee did not discuss the findings in particular, that while they had questions for the consultant, and they didn't discuss the recommendations. It's been forwarded back to staff for further comment. From a staff perspective, we'll come back to committee and then go to the CRD board. Normally, I would wait for it to go through the CRD board to show to council, but I think it's a report that's interesting and timely in terms of one of the aspects that Brad Edgett raised. So just a distinction between the Arts and Service Programming CRD and this Facilities Committee that was struck as a select committee, and will wind up its work probably in late spring or during the summer with recommendations. But what came out of that meeting is what Brad referred to, and I had a subsequent follow-up with James Lamb, manager at the Arts and Culture Service at CRD, and Jeremy Loveday, the Victoria councillor, who board director, who is the chair of the committee, and he confirmed that if you are not a participant in the CRD Regional Arts Service, or if you are just making a donation, which we discussed as committee last week, then if there is an arts organization in one of the municipalities that does participate in the arts service, and we know there are 9, that if they are applying for a project grant that involves using a Sydney venue, they do not receive granting for participation at the Sydney venue. They only would receive funding for participation in venues at municipalities that are part of the service. And so that just that was a confirmation. I know Councillor Wainwright did raise that at our meeting last week. The other that came up, and this is just again arose as partly as a question last week in the discussion, was there has been no change to a municipality either joining or withdrawing from a CRD Arts service or the CRD Arts and Culture service. And because Sydney has not been a part of the Arts and Culture service, if we were to rejoin the Arts and Culture service, we would be able to withdraw in either after the first year or after the second year by the same process that that the previous council put in place for the more recent withdrawal. So just a clarification on that. But I'm fully prepared to take Brad Edgett's concern, and I share it to a degree that if we're talking about trying to foster and support a regional arts ecosystem, that to not allow smaller organizations to use when they receive certain funding from CRD Arts to perform in or to support performances in Sydney doesn't really fully support the regional arts ecosystem. And so I'll leave my update there with Brad Edgett and the Mary Winspear Center. This will be a practice that I continue in terms of in the agenda, including the CRD board highlights for the same month that the CRD board meetings take place. I apologize that I didn't move or bring the December 9th forward at our last council meeting. Our last meeting, the CRD board highlights from December 9th came out after our December 14th council meeting. But I want to speak with one particular item in the. I wanted to speak to first the CRD board highlights, and so as I've updated council in the past, this was a new reporting mechanism that the CRD board instituted in 2020. I know some colleagues subscribe to this this monthly update, which all elected officials and all residents can certainly subscribe to. But it's an important link to the services provided by CRD and the activities of the board and the committees. And one of the benefits of the report and the way I asked it to be presented in our agenda is that you can click on the CRD web link within the agenda package and go to the report. But within the report, you have all of the links within the CRD website, which include things like staff reports, the webcasts, presentations, media releases, and so on. So I think it's very valuable and was brought forward by the board to have a succinct presentation to not only the taxpayers throughout the region, but elected representatives in all of the municipalities that are part of the CRD. Speaking specifically, I just wanted to highlight further highlight one of the highlights in the December 9th report, and that was with regards to the transportation gap summary. And council will recall, and the public, that I updated council in the fall that we had received, after nearly 2 years, the provincial South Island transportation strategy, and that it did not come forward. While it was a lengthy report, it did not come forward with specific action items that would take place in the CRD in the immediate future or in the longer term. It identified some priorities and described the importance of a lot of things, but it didn't move action forward. And so the CRD, through its meeting, the board, through its meetings in the fall, concluding with this board meeting in December, took 3 actions. One is it established a transportation committee, and after myself consulting with colleagues, Mayor Jeff Orr of North Saanich, Mayor Ryan Windsor of Central Saanich, and the CRD board chair, I have been appointed as the Peninsula representative on the CRD Transportation Committee, which will have its first meeting next month. And the second action that we took is we passed a resolution to have CRD staff work with all of the local municipalities, First Nations, and transportation providers, including BC Transit, BC Ferries, and the Island Corridor Foundation, which does the Island Rail Corridor from Victoria up to Nanaimo, to engage them on developing a list of regional transportation priorities, which will then come to the board. And the fourth thing that we did at the board was ask CRD staff to research options for a transportation governance model that will improve regional transportation coordination and provide long-term advocacy and action through the provincial government. So I just wanted to provide that update from the December meeting. Turning to the January meeting, the one highlight that I want to speak to, and I'm actually going to read the press release with regards to First Nations representation on CRD standing committees. I tried to be a little more succinct in a summary, but I think everything said in the media release is important and is an excellent summary of the board direction. So this was released on January 13th, and I apologize if you've already seen it, but for members of the public as well. The Capital Regional District Board approved a number of bylaw changes to provide for the inclusion of First Nations elected representatives on CRD standing committees. So while we have 3 CRD boards, we also have approximately 10 CRD standing committees. The transportation is one of them. First Nations have expressed a desire for an increased role in regional decision-making, and this opportunity creates space for more inclusive discussions and First Nations involvement in CRD governance. Our board chair said, "This is a truly significant and important change to CRD governance. I am so proud that we are taking this step in bringing together First Nations elected representatives and CRD directors to support more collaborative decision-making as part of our commitment to reconciliation." The approved bylaw changes creates a flexible model of inclusion where First Nations elected representatives can formally participate and vote on items of interest at CRD standing committees. As part of the consultation process with First Nations, CRD staff reached out to councils and staff from local First Nations to seek further input on the bylaw and discuss if they have additional interests on how they envision participation at the committee level. And that engagement included with the Wasanich Leadership Council, and they do have an interest in participating. Staff continue to engage all First Nations in the region to continue the conversation and reinforce the opportunity of the flexible model while still working towards more inclusive and collaborative governance. This initiative is intended to support the participation of First Nations in CRD's decision-making, while also establishing a foundation to better understand how new decision-making systems could be created together. At this time, provincial legislation limits full First Nations participation on the CRD board, except through a modern treaty. And the board will continue to advocate with the provincial government to reconsider a role for First Nations. This effort to facilitate increased participation of First Nations on the board governance is an important measurable step towards board's priority of reconciliation and in working towards strong relationships with First Nations based on trust, mutual respect, partnerships, and working together on shared goals. And I certainly look forward to working with them at the CRD committees, on the CRD committees. The last item I have in my mayor's report is just our upcoming budget meetings, and just speaking to the public that the meetings will commence next Monday. We have posted notices in the Peninsula News Review and through our social media. There will be a series of meetings, and council, on behalf of council, we certainly look forward to members of the public, whether you're residents or part of the business community who pay taxes or are affected, to provide your input through our meetings over the next month or so. That concludes my report. I'll turn to council reports and turn to Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, is that me echoing? Okay, it's finished. I'm sorry. This is just an update on the CRD and the Peninsula Water Commissions. We had budget items that Councillor Wainwright and I had brought forward from those commissions in October 26th meeting. And we had a fair number of dollars allocated towards earthquake hardening of our number 4 main that was being applied. We were applying for a lot of grant funding through the federal disaster mitigation and preparedness granting. And we had really high hopes for that. CRD staff were actually approached by the government to make sure that we would apply for it. And then we did not get it as the program was oversubscribed. So we've had to update our budgets and kind of spread out the project a little more than we'd originally hoped we would be able to do it. In addition to the oversubscription, it was that this was not yet a shovel-ready project. we had still not done our design stage. So the very first thing that the CRD is going to be looking to do with this budget is make sure that the entire thing is designed so that in future years, with new intakes for the federal granting program, we can hopefully apply and have shovel-ready components of this project going forward, and go from there. But so what we've done is updated the 5-year plan. It was worth 26.3 million, and 13.3 million was what we had applied for. It's an overall grant of 87 million. So or $87 million project. And so we've reduced that in the 5-year from to a $50 million project because we did not get that funding. So the loan amounts now for the CRD is going to be, the full loan that the CRD would be hoping to take out to do this project is going to be 32.1 million. And the peninsula is going to be 12.9 million. $3.3 million of the project is going to be coming out of the CRD's capital reserves and 1.8 million out of the peninsula. And that 1.8 million on the peninsula is the amount of money going forward for 2021. So what we will be proceeding with first is a section of the number 4 pipe that's in Langford will be upgraded. A Bear Hill connector segment to allow water from the reservoir there to service the peninsula in the event of a break further south in the system. And a piece of connector at Willingdon Road, and that will be taken only to the design stage. We have no plans in the 5-year plan to go forward with that. For the other 2, construction should begin 2022 onwards. And for the Peninsula Wastewater Commission, we've added an approved budget has been increased by $300,000 to replace our sludge dewatering equipment. And the total budget is now 1.4 million, and it's all funded from capital reserves. There's no loans required for that. Does anyone have questions? There's a lot of numbers thrown out.
Are there any questions from colleagues? Thank you, Councillor Duncan, for the update, and we look forward to that project. It's been on the list for quite some time. That concludes council reports. We'll turn to committee reports, and I'll turn to Councillor Garnett, who was chair of our committee of the whole meeting last week.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll move the minutes be received.
Seconded by Councillor O'Keefe. Any errors or omissions? All those in favor? Motion carries.
The committee recommends, and I so move, to recommend council that consideration of Artsie's Peninsula Arts and Culture Grant Program proposal be referred to the 2021 budget process.
Second.
We have a second by Councillor Rintoul. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Thank you.
Second recommendation, committee recommends, and I so move that staff bring forward to the 2021 budget process a voluntary contribution in the amount of $10,000 per year to the CRD Art Service.
Second.
Second by Councillor Rintoul. Discussion? I want to make a comment that I think my colleagues are aware that I'm in full support, would be in full support of Sydney rejoining the CRD Arts and Culture Service at approximately $42,000 per year, appreciating that full membership would be $130,000 per year. And while I don't think moving forward with a $10,000 contribution or whatever amount council chooses during budget deliberations as a donation, I think the importance of supporting the regional arts ecosystem warrant reconsideration of joining CRD Arts Service. When we look at what the taxpayer through CRD requisition pay for recreation services at the Panorama Recreation Center, the taxpayer support for regional arts is tiny. And so while I'm in favor of rejoining the CRD Arts Service, I won't oppose this motion before council. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor? Opposed? Councillor O'Keefe is opposed. The motion carries.
Recommendation number 3, committee so recommends, and I so move, that $7,500 be allocated in the 2021 budget to engage Modus Planning, Design, and Engagement Incorporated for First Nations engagement during the official community plan review project.
Second.
Second by Councillor O'Toole. Discussion? All those in favor? None opposed. The motion carries. And the last recommendation, Councillor?
Committee recommends, and I so move, that the proposed water rate structure and accompanying rates be approved as follows. Water rate structure: 1, infrastructure levy or parcel tax rate for 2021, $75 per year. 2, fixed charge rate for 2021, $20 per quarter. Number 3, variable consumption charge rate for 2021, $5.37 per 1,000 gallons.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor? None opposed. Motion carries. Thank you, Councillor Garnett. For item 12B, I'll turn to Councillor O'Toole, our liaison to the Advisory Planning Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll move receipt of the minutes.
Seconder?
Second.
Second.
Seconded. Any errors or omissions? All those in favor? None opposed. Motion carries. Thank you. And I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright, one of our 3 council representatives on the committee with regards to Beacon Wharf Select Committee.
I'll move that the minutes of the January 6th meeting be received.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor? None opposed. Motion carries. Thank you.
There's one recommendation from the meeting, and I so move that up to $100,000 be set aside for additional consulting, engagement, and technical investigation to review options for Beacon Wharf.
Second.
Discussion? Aye. Councillor O'Keefe.
Yes, thank you. So I'm just wondering if members of the committee could provide a little bit more background into that. I looked through the report, and I'm trying to remember first of all, where that amount would come from. I can't recall whether we had, there's pots of money that we had anticipated for this or not. And I guess what other sorts of engagement we're looking at, what other sorts of consulting, and why wasn't this included in the original budget? Have there been things that have come up that we weren't anticipating that requires a need for this? So just looking for some clarity on that.
Thank you, Councillor. I turn to Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'm sure staff can expand on things if I missed some stuff. But so first, yes, there are some things that have come up during the process that we hadn't originally thought about. So, for example, the floating structure option. And we recognize that we need to have some geotechnical work done. Either actually for all of the options, because we're looking at pile driving for some of the options, and we need to know the geotechnical for that. And if we go with the floating structure option, again, there is some pile driving involved, but there's also some dredging involved to get the minimum water depth for the floating option. So we're not sure at this point exactly what geotech work we need done, because they haven't worked out the preferred footprint for the floating structure. So we don't have a cost, but staff had an estimate of $60,000 for that geotechnical work before. So that's one of the items that's in there. There is definitely going to be the need for community engagement on some of the options, particularly with respect to some of the visual aspects of increasing the height to adapt to sea level rise. And we know that some graphics and visualization aids are going to be important for that. We're also not entirely sure how the pandemic is going to influence the community engagement. So we need a little bit of flexibility on that. And we're also recognizing that it would be good to collect some wave climate data so that we can confirm the calibration of the wave climate models. And that is potentially under this budget as well. Timing of some of these things is flexible, and that's why the recommendation is an up to amount, because the wave climate stuff could, for example, be done this year if we can catch the tail end of the storm season. But if not, then it would likely be done next winter to make sure we get, kind of the peak storms. And I think I've left some stuff out, and I'll pass it over to staff if I missed something important.
Does staff wish to comment?
Mr. Hisik, funding source? Oh. I just wonder, Andrew, if you want to comment on the funding source in terms of the 100,000.
Through the chair, at this time, the proposed funding source will be town amenity funds. That's to be reviewed as part of the budget.
Thanks, Andrew. And with respect to other aspects, I'm not sure if Ms. Clary has any further comments on the update.
Thanks, Randy. I think Councillor Wainwright did a pretty great job. Not much he missed, so good job. Thanks.
Thank you, staff, and thank you, Councillor O'Keefe.
Yeah, sorry, just to follow up. So just on the geotechnical stuff, so is that, I recall when we got the first a report, and I believe there was some geotechnical data there, or we had requested some. So I'm just trying to get an understanding of, did we get what we wanted in that initial report? What was the information we're seeking now just missing? Or is it that because we're considering these other options, like the floating sort of structure, that we require this additional geotechnical info?
If I could maybe try a first shot at this. The initial reports, they collected all of the available geotechnical information. So that isn't complete enough for everything. And we know that we have to do some, very detailed site-specific stuff to be able to address those pile driving issues. And if we go with the floating wharf one, we need to be able to estimate the volume of dredging that has to be done. And we had not previously looked at that at all. And also, if we go with the dredging one, we're going to have to look at the chemistry of the sediments to make sure that we don't have any contamination issues that might influence what we do with the dredge material. So there's a range of geotechnical stuff that is necessary, and we haven't designed that program yet. It would depend a bit on which options make it to the short list.
Right, okay. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you, councillors. I have a question for either one of the committee, council committee participants or staff, and that is, and I see it was probably a previous report, that the cost for removal of the current wharf, that will have to occur regardless of the option that council chooses, because the wharf is coming to the end of its life in the next 5 to 10 years. But a significant cost was attached to that in a recent report. Will part of the expenditure of this $100,000 in funds gather information that will be necessary for removal of the existing structure?
I'll defer the question to Ms. Clary. I believe we do have an updated estimate on
that.
Sorry, just for clarification, I'm not looking for the reaffirmation of the cost of removing the wharf, but the expenditure of this $100,000. Thank you. So
to the mayor, the $100,000 is, I again, as Councillor Wainwright mentioned, that an upper limit of potential consulting costs, so that could be included in the additional consulting costs. So it's not specifically 100% earmarked for specific things. We just know there are additional costs coming, and that could be one of them. Well, that will need to be one of them eventually, whether that's this year or next year. It's going to need to be something that is looked at in more detail. So,
okay,
the
thank
answer
you.
is yes, we can make it work if that is the priority for this funding.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hisik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to clarify that you made reference to a recent staff report, and as was covered in the PNR, that staff report made it very, very clear, and in fact it was bold in the report, that those costs that were thrown around for the three options were purely speculative, and I'm not sure the PNR picked up on that. So when we put an estimate of $2 million for removal of the wharf, it really doesn't have any basis of fact.
And thank you, and that's why I didn't make reference to it, because it's really undetermined at this time. But it will be significant at some stage. So thank you for those remarks. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All in favor? None opposed. Motion carries. Thank you, Councillor Wainwright. We'll now move to staff reports, and the first is item 13A, the cannabis retail license application. Buds Cannabis, the proponent, at 9775 2nd Street, and I'll ask staff to introduce, please.
So brief introduction from Mr. Newcomb.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this is a continuation of a cannabis retail store license referral for Buds Cannabis at 9775 2nd Street. Council previously considered this on October 26th of last year, and at that time, if you recall, you had requested that the Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch go through their own assessment process and confirm that this particular applicant was suitable and passed their fit and proper assessment prior to the town considering it further. So they have passed that LCRB fit and proper assessment, and they submitted a full application to us in early January. So in terms of the store itself, it's just south of Beacon Avenue on the east side of 2nd Street. It's in a location that's zoned for cannabis retail, meets the conditions of use as well. They have proposed hours of service that are fairly limited in terms of other liquor and cannabis locations in town. There are no uses within 100 meters of the site that would be considered sensitive uses, so there's no concern from that perspective. They also meet the rest of the requirements under the town's liquor and cannabis licensing policy. The one item that staff were a bit unclear about was the window treatment. Slightly less concerned about this location given that it's not directly on Beacon Avenue, but originally I think the proposal was to have a bit of an opaque window treatment similar to the previous application, if council recalls that one. But hearing the applicant's statement tonight, it sounds like they're shooting for something more of a clear window with a display in behind. So there's no concerns with that type of proposal. And staff are recommending that this be moved on to public engagement and gathering of views. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newcomb. And so as Mr. Newcomb's indicated and the report indicates, we're not considering the application this evening. We're looking at moving the process forward in terms of gathering views. We have 3 recommendations which can be moved together. Councillor
I'll move the 3 recommendations. That staff be directed to gather the views of residents regarding the proposed cannabis retail store license at 9775 2nd Street, Buds Cannabis, and report back to council with the results. 2, that the methods used to gather resident views include the following, and that any written correspondence received be forwarded to council for consideration. A, that owners and tenants in occupation of property within 100 meters, that's 328 feet of 2410, that's 9775 2nd Street, be notified by mail. B, that advertisements be placed in 2 consecutive issues of the Peninsula News Review. C, that signage consistent with Schedule D of Land Use Procedures Bylaw number 1380 be placed in the storefront window of the proposed location for a period of not less than 14 days. And 3, that council provide a special public participation opportunity at the council meeting where the public may speak to the proposed cannabis retail store license.
Second.
We have it moved and seconded. Discussion? Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I'm in favor of the recommendation. I've less concern with this due to its location. I think this is a more suitable location. The only thing I wondered about, I'm not going to object or anything, but maybe staff could ask the owners about the bench at the front. And I was just thinking, you know, as I read the report, there was mention about the applicant is committed to deterring loitering. And so I guess my only suggestion would be, if we don't want people to loiter, let's not put a bench there. That's my only comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? And none opposed. Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, staff. We'll turn to item 13B, which is the new bus stop location at James White Boulevard at Resthaven Drive, and recommendation.
I'll move that the report be received for information.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor? None opposed. The motion carries. We did have discussion during the presentation with regards to requesting staff provide notification to nearby residents. I think Mr. Humble made an important comment that if there is that sort of engagement or notification, I think it would have to be made clear that the town has taken a decision, and if there was actually a date able to be provided in the notice that it was going to transpire, I think that would be helpful information to the nearby residents, and certainly providing a contact information as we normally do for any questions that they have. But I think that would make it clear that there was a notice. Mr. Hummel?
Just, Mr. Mayor, if I could just maybe request a motion to that effect, it'd be helpful.
Certainly. If council is supportive of that, I'll look for a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? None opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. I'll turn to item 13C, which is the town's participation in the Clean BC Better Homes program, and perhaps an introduction from staff.
Thank you again, Mr. Mayor. So this report details an opportunity for the town to participate in the provincial Clean BC Better Homes program. And what that essentially is a provincial subsidy program where homeowners with fossil fuel fired heating devices, appliances in their homes can switch them out for electrical heat pump or electrical hot water heaters. And the province provides them a subsidy to do that, up to $4,300 per home. So the town has an opportunity to top up that provincial subsidy. And the table on page 2 of my report details some of the other municipalities in the CRD and what their top-up levels are. Most are fairly similar, with the exception of the City of Victoria, who has sort of gone above and beyond. The program itself is managed completely by the province, so the town would essentially just opt in. We sign an agreement with them. We let them know how much the town is willing to put forward into this program. And then the program just invoices the town every time a homeowner takes the program opportunity. An initiative like this is fairly well supported in our planning documents. The OCP has a number of policies related to greenhouse gas reductions, and home heating is one of the major categories of greenhouse gas production in the community, along with transportation. So this is one way to help reduce that and further reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The Climate Action Plan also speaks to reducing home heating fuel use. So lots of policy support for this. Staff have sort of put together 3 options that council may want to consider. Option 1 is sort of a grab bag where we say the town is willing to subsidize all the categories that you see listed there. So heat pumps, electric hot water heating, electric heat pump hot water heating, electrical service upgrade that helps homeowners convert to those appliances. And basically the town would then monitor which of those is sort of most popular, and we would bring a report back in a year to let council know, what was sort of the main category and with the potential for maybe focusing in on that area in the future. The other 2 options sort of look at a few categories where the town might just want to focus on heat pumps or something like that. But we think in the first year it might be good to offer the subsidy for everything and then see where we're at in a year and make some decisions going forward from there. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright, Councillor Garnett, then Councillor O'Keefe. Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I very much support the town participating in this, and option 1 does look reasonable to me. The one thing I guess I would be concerned about is the funding in 2021. And the reason I raise that is that Clean BC, in response to the pandemic, is offering a double rebate on their side of it. And that double rebate is time limited. Currently, you can sign up on their website and get essentially a placeholder that lets you submit your invoice, for the work done up to the end of June this year. So in the first 6 months of 2021, if you participate in this, Clean BC is going to give you double. If you wait until next year to do it, you're leaving several $1,000s on the table. So I think 2021, we're going to see the big uptake in this. And I think $10,000 is going to be too low to respond to that. So that's my concern. I'm completely happy with going with option 1. Given this high uptake now, if we're going to provide any kind of top-up or rebate, we really should do it like ASAP and not wait until the budget process, because people are actively trying to take advantage of that double rebate or thinking about the double rebate. I would be thinking about allocating a larger amount of money, and if it isn't spent entirely in 2021, simply letting it carry over. Anyway, that's my input on things.
Thank you, Councillor. Turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Newcomb, and thank you, Councillor Wainwright. That's good information. I just have a really specific question that a resident asked, and I'm hoping you can provide some clarification. So if somebody switches out an electric water heater for a tankless on-demand water heater, is that something that would be considered?
I don't believe so. I believe you have to switch away from a fossil fuel based, so heating oil or gas type of appliance to an electric appliance in order to qualify.
Great. Thanks for the information. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor. Turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. My question, sort of in the same vein as Councillor Wainwright, in regards to the timing of this, and I'm just wondering how quickly. So, if we were to say, yes tonight to go ahead with this and come up with an amount, and I'd be in agreement with a higher amount. In terms of the administrative and bureaucratic hurdles that you have to go through, how soon would the funds be available through the provincial program for our residents? Do you have any idea of that?
Through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, I think essentially as we get the agreement signed with the program, where it goes. So if council approves it tonight, we will contact them tomorrow and get that agreement underway.
Okay.
Councilor Wainwright?
And no, I just had another question, if I may finish.
Yep.
And I was just wondering, would you need direction from council to launch an advertising campaign with that? Or is that something that you would do just as a normal course of action when offering such a program?
Yeah, correct. We're going to be doing social media outreach, and typically we would have brochures and whatnot in the town hall, so we might have to look at another way to get out there with some paper-based products. But yeah, we would do some advertising for sure right away.
Okay, good. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wainwright, take it for a second time.
Sorry, it's actually a follow-up on Councillor O'Keefe's. The Clean BC program rebates are available now for anyone. And if you apply, you just don't get a top-up from us. Whereas, if you live somewhere else, you might. Is there a possibility that we could actually make our 2021 top-up retroactive? Because like there may be people who applied in early January, already got it approved, and would miss our top up, as it were, by a week or two. And as far as if they actually applied to Clean BC and got it approved, that would be the kind of proof we would need to offer some kind of rebate. So I think council might decide we don't want to do it, but the question I would have to staff is whether it's possible for us to offer a retroactive top up, because then the implementation doesn't matter as much. You could take your time to get it in place, and people would still know that it was going to be available, and they would take advantage of it.
I'll turn to staff.
Yeah, through the mayor to Councillor Wainwright. I don't know the answer to that, Councillor Wainwright. We'd have to get in touch with the program and ask them. It may be possible. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it'll take us long to get up and running. But yeah, potentially we could let them know that from January 1st, if there are subsidies that have been granted in that time, that we could include them.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Garnett and Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Newcomb, this is through you to staff. Was just wondering, as far as advertising goes, has our Town Talk already gone to print, or is that something we could add into it as an advertisement?
Through the mayor to Councillor Garnett. I know Town Talk was very close to going out. I'm not 100% sure on the status of it. I do believe we have another Town Talk going out in spring-ish, March, April. So we could certainly get something in there if we've missed this winter edition.
Yeah, through the mayor, we can certainly look to see which Town Talk makes the most sense. If it's possible to get it out sooner than later, we will for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just with respect to the comment of retroactive, if we're looking at this from an incentive standpoint, I don't know that we need to add that element to this equation. I think I'd rather see us join the program and be able to market it with a clear start date. For residents who are perhaps looking at spring projects, for example, and this provides them that opportunity. With regard to option one, and it being a more comprehensive list of eligible programs in which to apply for support from the town for rebate, implications on staff time to Mr. Newcomb. Is it as manageable essentially once you've got the program established to provide the rebate opportunities? So sort of the 6 categories versus 2 or 3. Any concerns with that on staff demand at the counter or online, I should say?
through the mayor to Councillor Rintoul, I don't believe there's any difference. We essentially let them know which categories that we'd be willing to do the top up on, and they just automatically invoice us for whatever category gets taken up by the general public. So no, I don't think there would be any extra workload there.
Okay. Thank you. Any further discussion? So we do have the 3 recommendations, and as worded, it would implement, as Mr. Newcomb has said, as early as tomorrow, and they could be moved together. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
I'll move that council authorize the town to become a municipal partner in the Clean BC Better Homes Rebate Program with funding of $15,000 for 2021. That number 2, that council choose option number 1 for initial program incentives, and that staff report back to council in early 2022 with data on program uptake.
I'll second for discussion.
We have a seconder. I'll go to the mover and seconder to speak first.
Yeah, and the only reason I picked the $15,000 option was because when I looked at option number 1, if somebody did all of the upgrades, I think it adds up to $1,450. Mr. Newcomb in the report indicated that, you know, they would be quite happy to do to get 10 done in the year. So it just seemed to me that $15,000 would cover what staff anticipated we might use. But I'm open to amendments if people think that that's not enough. Thank you.
Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would actually propose 50,000 rather than 15. I know that staff would be happy if we had 10 convert, but given the double rebate going on, 10 is not a very big number. When I was doing a bit of research a while ago, I found that the assessment authority in their database actually had information about the primary heating source for structures. And at the time, there were somewhere around 200 single-family detached homes in Sydney still with oil furnaces. So we would, speaking as a councillor with an interest in the climate action stuff, I would like to see more than 5% of that convert in a year. It's like, how do we encourage them to convert faster? And I would not like to see a budget limit on our part do that, cap that.
Okay, I see Mr. Newcomb wishes to speak, and then Councillor Duncan, but we could always have an amendment if you wish to entertain that, Councillor. Mr. Newcomb.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to add as well that you'll notice the City of Victoria has veered away from the 350 heat pump top-up. It is possible, if council is looking for at the risk of complicating things slightly in the discussion, it is possible as well to do a larger subsidy for each category. That being said, I think with the double top-up that Councillor Wainwright is referring to, I think we might get to a point where the subsidies probably outweigh the cost of doing this work altogether. And in that case, I'm not sure what the province would do in terms of drawing from the municipal top-up. But 350, what we've tried to do with these numbers is be consistent across the region. So there's some consistency to the program with residents across Greater Victoria, but it certainly is possible instead of say $350 to do $500 or $750. I thought I'd put that out there for discussion as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Newcomb. Councillor Duncan.
Yeah, I'm actually at 50,000, and just the sheer volume of the work and the timeline that Clean BC has already put on it, that the work must be done by June. I'm actually worried about running out of contractors who'd be able to do the work for everybody who wanted to sign up. So I'm when Councillor Wainwright brought it up earlier, I thought it almost seems like we might end up wanting to have more money available as well, so that there are going to be people who simply cannot get the work done because there will not be buildings contractors available with the building boom that's just going on in general, to make sure that people can still do it in 2021 and beginning of 2022, and they're not going to miss out because of that deadline or because of the lack of contractors. So yeah, I'm okay with being able to have the higher amount and then being able to roll it over just to make sure that we can continue incentivizing people who got their hopes up and then couldn't get it done.
Thank you, Councillor. I have a question through to staff, and I apologize if it was in the report, but the source of funds would come from?
Unfortunately, I don't have a magic pot for this one. It'll be tax funded.
Thank you. I'm in support of the higher amount. I think it's a situation where, and colleagues have spoken to it already, that we do want to incent this program for reduction of greenhouse gases, and that if we allocated $10,000 and we have more people come forward, we're going to hear from staff that there's insufficient funds, and we're going to go through a discussion again about how much we should top it up. The reality is, if we create the pot, and if it's unused, it can be rolled over, or a decision made in the future. So I really look forward to. I was going to ask, would there be any cost attached to promoting it? I realize social media is low cost, and Town Talk is low cost, and that it already goes out. But I think when we look at the staff report and we see that there has been relatively very low uptake in the past from Sydney residents from the existing program run by the province with a CRD top up, that it's important that it really be promoted heavily for it to be successful. And I think the larger amount actually signals to the public that we're serious about trying to move this initiative forward. Seeing hands, turn to Mr. Newcomb and then Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just, in terms of promotion of the program, I wonder if Council would want staff to undertake some advertisement in the Peninsula News Review. It's a relatively expensive way to go in terms of advertisement, but it may be a way to reach more people. At the moment, we had only planned to do social media and Town Talk. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn to Mr. Humble.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just following up on that, I think certainly we could start with an actual media release, and that might be the cheapest and easiest way to get some media traction on something like this, and I'm sure they would pick up on it.
Mm-hmm. Very good thought. Thank you. I think you want to speak. I'll turn to Councillor Fallett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to Councillor Wainwright for bringing this idea.
We're just getting some static with rustle of papers, I think, Councillor Fallett.
Oh, sorry, my apologies. I just want to say thank you for bringing this this proposal forward. I think when I first heard Councillor Wainwright say $50,000, I sort of did an intake of breath. It's good my my audio was muted at that point, but thinking about and listening to my colleagues speak, I think we do need to walk the talk and be serious about this. And I think the $50,000 is something that we should support and get this program rolled out. So I'm prepared to support. If we can agree on increasing the amount, I would support that motion.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. So we do have a motion on the floor at $15,000. I see Councillor Wainwright, then Councillor O'Keefe.
So I'd like to move an amendment that we replace the 15,000 with 50,000.
Do we have a seconder?
I'll second that.
Councillor O'Keefe seconding. You wish to speak any further, Councillor Wainwright?
Actually, just one thing regarding the advertising. We have some local companies that do these kind of upgrades. And in fact, the way I heard about that double rebate that Clean BC was offering was they were publicizing that. Like they're advertising because it's a lot of business. So once they hear that the rebate is available in Sydney, I really would not be surprised if they're pushing it, and we should take advantage of them to help get the word out.
Thank you. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I agree with all that, and I think another benefit from this, aside from reducing greenhouse gas emissions, is also it's contributing to our local economy. And I think this is something Councillor Wainwright had mentioned some time ago in previous discussions, is that there's local companies that do this sort of stuff. So it's also a bit of economic stimulus to our local economy. It also occurs to me that one of the things in our strategic plan was to facilitate perhaps more secondary suites in Sydney. And although this isn't directly related to that, if you've got people who are looking to renovate their business or their basement, that they might, think, well, I've been thinking about doing this for a while. And now if there's some rebates here where at the same time I can change out my furnace in the basement and do a few other things, I think it adds that incentive. So I think, it's a lot of money, $50,000, but I think the spin-offs are multiple and worthwhile.
Thank you, Councillor. So on the amendment, all those, Councillor Garnett.
Thank you. Actually, I want to propose sort of another amendment, but speaking to sort of piggybacking on what Councillor Duncan said, it occurred to me that if people can't get it done in time, as an added incentive, I would like to see, as Mr. Newcomb mentioned, the electric heat pump, that particular one bumped up to $1,000. Just because I think if people can't meet that commitment time-wise with the government, then we still have that incentive to add a little more to the pot after the fact. And the oil tanks and the oil for heating purposes is one of the big ones we want to get rid of. So I think that helps to also incentivize it a little more. Just, I don't know what everybody else thinks about that. But.
Okay, if we could, Councillor, I appreciate the point, Councillor. If we could finish this amendment and then, and if you wish to propose an amendment or have a discussion about a possible change in amount. Seeing no further discussion on the amendment, all in favor? None opposed, motion carries. Did you want to continue, Councillor?
Just sort of said it. Does council have any appetite for what I'm suggesting, or am I off base here?
Councillor Wainwright?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's a reasonable idea, but I think it might make sense until we wait until that 6 month is up before we increase the rebate amount, because if part of what's going through my head is if we increase the rebate amount a lot, we're going to be putting a lot of pressure on the companies that do the installations, because people are going to be trying to get them to do it in Sydney as opposed to a project in one of our neighboring municipalities. And once the double rebate is over, that's when we want to create a big incentive to have people continuing to want to do it. So I don't think we need to offer a larger top-up during that double rebate period, but we might want to consider doing it when the double rebate ends. And at that point, we're 6 months into the year, and we probably even have some idea of what the uptake is being like. Like, one of the things about allocating the 50,000, if it turns out that we spent it all, wow, we've done a huge amount on, to deal with greenhouse gas reduction. And if we don't, then maybe we want to increase the rebates and make sure that people are taking advantage. So I would just argue that we might look at increasing our top up later as opposed to right off the bat.
Thank you, Councillor. Wish to continue?
Yeah, if that's okay, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, the only reason I bring that forward is because in the part 3 of the recommendation, we're talking about early 2022. So there's a gap of 6, 7, 8 months, that people won't have that extra incentive. So is there a way we can revisit this, Mr. Newcomb, or once we pass recommendation 3, we're sort of stuck in that time frame?
If I might just interject, I think if we implemented the program and staff saw it going in a direction that was, different than expected, they would certainly come bring it before council. I don't think they would, necessarily wait until 2022. That's just a check-in point for that. But Mr. Newcomb?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I think it does say in the report that if the funds run out partway through the year, that we would report back to council. But certainly, if there's anything worth reporting on, I think we would come back and seek council direction.
No, thank you. Then I'm fine with the way it is.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Further discussion on the main motion? All in favor? None opposed? That carries. Thank you, Mr. Newcomb. Well, that went a little longer than I expected as an item. It's now 25 after 8, and how about we recess for 5 minutes now? For members of the public, we're going to leave the Zoom call live and our webcast live, and we'll meet back here in 5. Thank you. Okay, colleagues, we'll reconvene and move on to our next agenda item, and that is item 13D, the CRD Draft Solid Waste Management Plan. And we could have an brief introduction from staff.
Yep, I'll defer to Ms. Clary for an introduction.
Sure. Thanks, everybody. So this is the CRD's draft solid waste management plan. They have requested municipalities to endorse the plan at this stage. It's in the second phase of consultation. They're seeking feedback from municipalities and the public and different groups at this phase. So if after reading through the plan or reading through some of the highlights in the report, if there are some concerns, council can voice them and staff can put together a bit of a response to CRD. But after reviewing the plan, there's a lot of details in it. Some of it won't impact Sydney directly in a lot of ways, but some of them will. So it would be a good thing to read. Some of the key things in the plan are that they plan on reducing the disposal rate. That they have kind of a optimistic goal of 125 kilograms per capita per year, and to 250 kilograms per capita per year by 2030. So that's what they're hoping to do. They're hoping to extend the landfill, Heartland landfill, to the year 2100 plus. So that really depends on the amount of garbage that people are disposing, or amount of waste people are disposing in that time. They want to have informed citizens that participate in proper waste management practices, and that's kind of somewhere I feel like the municipality can help out, kind of sharing some of the information that they're providing. And they also have the goal for CRD solid waste services to be financially sustainable. So yeah, a lot of their current finances are from tipping fees at the Heartland landfill. So they do estimate as people reduce garbage disposal, they may need to look at taxation sometime in the future. They don't have any sort of plans for that at this time, but that is something that several years / decades may come into effect. And that's about it for now. If you have any questions, let me know.
I'll turn to, thank you, Ms. Clary. I'll turn to colleagues for questions and start with Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can you tell me when, in terms of the feedback or response to CRD, when is that? Is that in the fall, or is there a deadline on that?
Yes, through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, they are looking for feedback by mid-February. So sooner rather than later, yeah.
Okay, and I'm wondering, like as you mentioned, they're interested in keeping citizens informed and participate. It would be nice if we could get other input from besides council. Is this something that we would put on our website and invite people to provide comments, or is that too unwieldy? And I guess the second option I might propose as, would it be reasonable to refer to our APC to look at? In the past, we've talked about making use of our APC for other things besides building issues, and their terms of reference does cover environmental sort of issues. So if you want to comment on whether those couple things might be reasonable or appropriate.
Sure, through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe. I'll comment on the sharing of the information. As far as I know, that it has been shared on Town of Sydney's social media, because the CRD has had a bit of a blitz, so I think we've reshared some of their information on it. I can definitely check in to see if we can do that again. And as far as directing it to committees, I might have to refer to Mr. Humble on that.
If I can, through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe. Yeah, it's an interesting suggestion in terms of referring something like this, which may be deemed, I suppose, as an environmental matter, to the Advisory Planning Commission. In terms of, I guess, scope of APC and whether or not this would be under their purview in terms of reference. Ms. Reagan might be able to comment better than I can, as it's been a while since I've reviewed their terms of reference. Yeah, I'm not sure if the APC, quite frankly, would have much comment on something like this. I think they would probably look to the staff report and the recommendations contained within the staff report in terms of their review. But again, Allison, I'm not sure if you want to comment further.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Humboldt. Through council, I've just checked the bylaw to establish the Advisory Planning Commission, and I do see that it is, as Mr. Humboldt mentioned, part of their mandate is to consider environmental matters referred to the commission by council. Again, I think that they would be looking to staff to provide a recommendation, so I'm not sure if there's any professional expertise on the APC in terms of solid waste management or environmental background in this field.
Yeah, I'm just looking for, because it's such a big document, and I think there's a lot of things in there, and one of the goals is to get citizens involved. I'm just looking for ways to expand that beyond council. So I'll just leave it at that to see if my colleagues have any other thoughts on that. Thank you.
Councillor Rintoul.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. As new council liaison to the APC, I'll just comment that, yeah, I think we have a group with some expertise that has probably been underutilized, given how quiet referrals have been during 2020. This one does feel like a stretch to me in the sense that I'm seeking, as I sit here, sort of the expertise that's around that table, sort of the purview in which they were interviewed and expressed interest in their participation, and granted, they're keen to try and participate. I think the opportunity is also there for those as individuals, as any resident of Sydney, to participate in providing comments on this. So I feel like it's a stretch, and I might be more inclined to have supported this if it were somewhat more closely aligned to what we consider the APC's mandate.
Attorney Councillor, thank you, Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just from a practical side, I don't think we really could refer this to the APC because I don't think the timing is going to work. It's a very large document, and CRD is looking for a response, I heard, in February, and they've only got one meeting coming up, and it's coming up relatively soon, and that is a huge document, and I am doubtful that they would be able to deal with it in a single meeting because I don't think we could. And then even if they did manage in a single meeting, they've got to make the recommendation back to us to approve before it gets forwarded to CRD. I just don't think we can make that timeline work. So if members of the APC are interested in getting involved and commenting, I'd say they should take the initiative and just do it. But I don't think we should refer this to the APC. I don't think it's going to work.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll just weigh in as your CRD director. I sat on the Environmental Services Committee last year, and yes, we did spend a lot of time on this, both at committee and then at the CRD board, on a number of occasions at CRD board. And just to highlight what the major considerations were for the board at the policy level was currently the province has a target of 350 kilograms per capita, and currently the CRD averages its current average is something under 400,000 or something under 400 but it's above 350. I can't remember the exact number, and you can see in the plan that it sets a target of 250K, but you can see that there is an aspirational target of 125. There is a separate advisory committee to set up that does have representation from citizens, and it was out of that process that they brought forward to the CRD board a recommendation to set a goal of 125. I referred back to the staff report from last fall, and CRD staff had spent approximately $170,000 of staff time on completing technical analysis and consultation associated with setting those targets. And the reason being is having a solid waste management plan for the region is a provincial requirement, a requirement by the provincial government. And once this plan is approved by the CRD board, it will have to go to the province for approval. And one of the criteria set by the province is that the goal or the target has to be realistic. And so while the board really wanted to set a lower target than 250, it wasn't supported by the technical analysis completed to date. And so the board supported the 250, which is significantly below the 350 provincial target. It is a 1/3 reduction from current levels in the region, and that is going to be a challenge to get to that level over the longer term. But that was the discussion at the board level, committee and board level. The other conversation that happens is over time there is additional lands at the Heartland facility that are forested and are used recreationally, particularly by mountain bikers. And those will have to be, in the plan, that will have to be deforested at a certain time. And blasting will have to occur to create area. And access to the Heartland will actually change over time to Willis Point Road. So there was a lot of community engagement over those very significant changes, and the CRD board does not want to see those forested lands changed in the long term for environmental reasons. And so we have actually referred it back to CRD staff to bring forward to the board or to the committee options for integrated resource management, because there are other options to putting the garbage in a landfill, apart from whatever measures you want to take to try and reduce the intake into the landfill. So those were the primary discussions at committee and board, and I don't support, I'm sure the APC members could delve into this, but in terms of the higher level policy that they might make recommendations back to council and through to CRD, I can say that we have had many representations from citizens around the region directly to committee and directly to board, and there is that opportunity as well. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you for those comments, and that makes sense. My question is more about what would happen next with this. So, in terms of reducing solid waste, would staff be looking at this, or should we be looking at it to see what can we do here in Sydney to help reduce waste? So, things that have been talked about before that I hear from citizens is about, why don't we reduce the weekly garbage pickup to once every 2 weeks, and increase the number of bins they can put out for yard waste, or increase composting, or come up with incentives to decrease the amount of waste. So I'm wondering, will we be looking at this further? And also, I'm wondering if this is something that our new climate change coordinator might look at when they get on site, and give us some ideas out how we can make a contribution to this.
Okay. Just before turning to staff, I can add that within the solid waste management plan is a significant effort by the CRD to educate and awareness campaigns for the public. There is a lot of ongoing education and awareness. But certainly things might be able to be done on a more local basis, and I'd turn to staff if they have any comment. Or Ms. Clary or Mr. Humble.
I'll see if Ms. Claria wants to comment first, and then I might may weigh in.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So there are a number of things that CRD has identified to collaborate with municipalities. I listed several of them on page 2 of the report. Like collaborate with stakeholders on education campaigns, develop model language for bylaws, best practices, OCPs, and economic development strategies. So really looking at some of the things that the CRD has outlined that they plan to collaborate with municipalities, and we would work with the CRD on those. Relating to the changes in the garbage collection, this actually came up last week here. We do have a contract with our existing garbage collection contractor until 2023. At that time, we'll kind of look at different options. It's not as easy as just making the change, because the same contractor picks up the garbage and the green waste, and we wouldn't want to reduce green waste pickup. So it is something we will consider when that contract is up for renewal, and there might be some engagement at that time on that particular issue. But there are several things identified that the CRD will work with municipalities on, and we plan to be partners in that. And yes, that could potentially, we'll have to see exactly how that role fits within the organization, how busy they are with other things, but it is potential that that person could potentially pick up some of this. Typically, the waste management is done through engineering, but it is, coordinating with CRD might be something that the climate action coordinator might be able to do.
Great, thank you for that.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no further questions, we do have a recommendation at the end of the report.
I'll move that council endorse the CRD's draft solid waste management plan.
Second.
Second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? None opposed, motion carries. Thank you. We'll move to item 13E, which is a request for funding for reflective window coverings at 9830 2nd Street, the Stones Throw, and we have a report from staff and a recommendation.
I'll move that council approve a final one-time funding allocation of up to $25,000 for the installation of a reflective film on the west and north elevation windows of 9830 2nd Street to be funded from the land sale reserve.
Second.
Second. Any discussion? Okay, I'll turn to the mover first, Councillor Wainwright, then I'll go to Councillor O'Keefe, Fallat, and Garnett.
So I think it's quite clear that this new development has created this privacy issue, and it seems to me entirely reasonable that that should have been considered during that development approval process. Yes, it's come to the fore during the construction. I think it is appropriate for the town to remedy that and use the funds from the sale of the land for that purpose.
Thank you, Councillor Wainwright. Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. Yeah, I have difficulty with this, and I don't think I can support the motion. In terms of the privacy issue, yeah, it should, I'm very sympathetic to the owners, but I feel that if we do this, that we're going to end up hearing from a bunch of other people. I've heard from other condo owners in the downtown area that have moved into a condo on, 3rd or 4th, and then a building goes up beside them, and they're upset because they have less privacy, they have less light, all these sorts of things. And yeah, they should have considered that. But I guess what I'm concerned about is if for these owners that we say that if our rationale is that the town should have considered the privacy issues at the time and they didn't, I guess what I'm worried about is those other owners coming forward to say, yeah, you guys did the same thing to us. So I'm concerned about that, setting that precedent. I note in the documentation provided that the owners, they point to information in I think the OCP and zoning from 2003. Then they built the property in 2004. And then 13 years later, it was when council decided to build that building. And it was controversial. And I also didn't agree with that. But the point is that the council of the day had the authority to do that. Whether or not we agreed with the decision, councils, I think, have to have the flexibility to change their mind and not be, just because something was in a plan from 13 years ago, that we have to have the flexibility to change our minds and do things differently. So I concerned for those reasons. And I know that, the other, I guess, the town has, or staff has indicated that they don't think that this will set a legal precedent. But what I think it sets is a moral precedent, is that we don't have to do this. It's not a legal thing. We're doing it as a goodwill gesture. And so what I'm concerned about is, again, that there will be more people coming forward to us that want us to extend a goodwill gesture also for what they're experiencing in their condo. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor Fallot.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I concur with Councillor O'Keefe's comments. I looked at this and my heart went out to the owners of the Stones Throw. I certainly see their concern and their issue, etc. Where I run into difficulty is if we are to cut a check for the $25,000, I do believe that is going to leave us open for other property owners to say that something has now occurred next door to them that they didn't anticipate, that should have been anticipated, and the town is responsible for some costs. The other part is there something else that's going to come up from the Stones Throw that is going to have them coming to our door saying, well, this is now impacting us and we need you to pay up for this. I'm not convinced that this is the best thing for us to be doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Turn to Councillor Garnett, then Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you,
and
Mr.
then
Mayor.
myself.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I concur with Councillors O'Keefe and Fallot. I did a nice long walk around the development the other day, and as far as the north side of it goes, I actually didn't see that many windows between the two buildings, and some of the windows seemed to be offset, so I was having a hard time understanding how that was an issue. And as far as the west side, with that parking lot in the middle, I understand some of the concerns they have and had, but as far as the privacy, there is a fair bit of distance between the two buildings. You'd have to really go out of your way to be looking at somebody's window. And, for me, that can happen in any building next to another building. I mean, if you want to be a peeping Tom, you can stretch to that imagination, but I just can't see that being something that's going to happen quite possibly very often, if at all. And as far as what the previous councillors had mentioned, I'm worried about the same thing. What other buildings go on in the future, and, well, this is what you did here. Why can't we have the same thing? And it may not be a legal precedent, as Councillor O'Keefe said, but it is something somebody could argue. Although I do understand the rationale of staff and why they think that it shouldn't be a precedent. But ultimately, for me, I'm not comfortable using town resources for modifications on a privately owned building, and that for me is why I won't be supporting the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. I turn to Councillor Rintoul and then myself.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've struggled with this one as well, and certainly came prepared as always to listen to my colleagues' comments on the matter. I had concerns around the precedent and perhaps continue to. I will acknowledge that I ran for council simply because of the type of approvals we were seeing on projects of this nature and this type of density that was coming before the town. And we didn't approve them this council, but it's being built out now, and we're seeing ramifications. The difference, and I sympathize, of course, with the residents, as I know my colleagues do in this scenario, in my mind, comes down to page 2 of the staff report. and I'll read the sentence, which notes, it should be noted that the placement of the Stones Throw building on their property and the allowance of a 0-meter setback building with unprotected windows is both unique and unprecedented, and a similar occurrence would never be permitted today. So that sentence resonates with me in terms of addressing the concern around precedent. In that, staff have confirmed for us how unique this scenario is, and I'm currently of the mind to support the recommendation that's before us. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor O'Toole. I'll turn to Mr. Humble, then myself, then Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be brief because I think most of the items I wanted to raise are contained in the staff report, but just picking up on the last point that was made by Councillor Rintoul, I think is a critical one. It should be made clear that the issue and fault is not the development that is under construction currently and that was approved. Again, that was approved through process, etc. It meets its setback requirements, and the unprotected, the windows that are on the east elevation of that building are completely appropriate. The issue goes back with respect to the approvals and construction of the Stones Throw building and the allowance for that building, as pointed out by Councillor Rintoul, to be constructed at 0 lot line with all the windows that are there currently. Typically, if it was a 0 lot line building, you would have a firewall with no windows, and therefore you wouldn't have the privacy issues. So I think it's important to raise that as the point that really, if you go back to the day, it's really the question mark around the allowance of permitting that building. The strata owners that are there, quite frankly, they're owners. They've lived there and enjoy the windows that look out to the west, and so it's really not their fault or their issue that the building was constructed in the way that it is. So that's why staff, quite frankly, think the request that's being made is a reasonable one and are prepared to support it from a staff perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. I just want to further the comments by Councillor O'Toole and Councillor Wainwright and Mr. Humble that, as stated in the report, this is an unprecedented situation, and therefore I don't believe it sets a precedent with regards to the 0 lot line. I was first approached by the Vice President of the Strata to discuss this matter, and I was taken into some of the units, and the windows on the north side are bedroom windows, and while the new development adjacent did try to offset the windows, it's a situation where they would basically have to close their blinds all the time, because you just don't know with the angles if somebody was looking in. That's an unfortunate situation, but I think this reflective material would allow at least some light in to those north face windows. As close as it is to as close as the two buildings are, and similarly the situation on the west side being a 0 lot line, and I think the recommendations brought forward by staff are reasonable. With regards to the colleague comment that would the Stones Throw seek further further actions by the town, they have clearly indicated. Mr. Humble spoke with the Strata president, who's Mr. McNamara, who's the author of the covering letter, and they have no intention in proceeding further. They realize that the development has reached its completion in terms of its height and its dimensions, and these are the impacts that they feel worthy of being addressed, and I don't see it going further than this, either with Stone's Throw or with another precedent. I'll turn to Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. I'm in favor of this recommendation for all of the reasons that Councillor Rintoul brought up, Mr. Humble and the Mayor, and I won't reiterate those points. So I did just want to speak to the notion of setting a moral precedent, and other people in other buildings feeling that they might qualify for such a redress as well. And as well, as staff has already pointed out that they don't think there's a legal precedent. I think in some way it does set a moral precedent, but I think it's opposite. People will probably come forward, but people are going to come forward anyway. People already did come forward when those developments were approved, saying that they did not like, buildings going up next to them. However, this was really the only development, as has been said, that was built in such a way that further development was not obviously planned for, whereas other developments where additional density is going up have been built to kind of that urban density standards that our fire chief has, come forward and talked about with additional firewalls and the changes to that, and the way our planners and staff have, reviewed this project and the differences in the zero lot line and how such a thing would never be built now. And so I think what this shows is that when Sydney is going forward with these increased density and developments, staff are aware and it is being done in a way that accounts for minimizing these kind of problems. Like, that's what these standards are for. That's what our staff look into. And to have staff come forward and say, in this case, the way building was done to this increased density was not the way it should be done. This isn't the way that increasing density is planned for in a community when we start building and we know that there are going to be properties turning over in an OCP. To say that we're going to eventually, go from a 2-story to a 4-story or a 5-story, planners are looking into this and minimizing these kind of effects. And so for staff to be able to say this kind of effect is not what we would expect, this isn't a just get with the program, that's what's going to happen. This was something that was not the way it should have been. And so in this case, this one case, they should be compensated for it. And I think that shows good moral precedent, that our planners that we're able to say that as a town, we understand how that should have happened and won't happen in the future, especially as we're going into our OCP planning now.
Thank you, Councillor. Second time speakers, Councillor Fallot, then Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to my colleagues for all the points they've raised. This is not an easy decision, but I also look at there was no covenant placed on title stating that nothing else would be built or to a specific height on the property to the east or to the west of Stone's Throw. And that's the part that I look at in the report. Staff talk about past staff who have since retired, so they can't consult with them, so they don't know what conversations or agreements, verbal agreements may have been made. And that's the part that for me is a problem. As I said, my heart goes out to the owners. I would not want to be in their situation. But I think there also has to be some ownership of purchasing a suite facing over to an undeveloped piece of property where there isn't a covenant on height restriction and making an assumption that nothing is going to happen on that property. And when I look at it from that perspective, as much as I would like to turn around and say, yeah, I think the town should support this, I don't see that argument as strong enough for me to dip into the town's money and say, this will be for you to pay for your window coverings. So I'm willing to be convinced otherwise, but at this point I don't have anything, I haven't heard anything that tells me that we should be paying for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the arguments that are being made for not doing this. And when I was first thinking about this, one of the significant things that influenced me, like I do remember the history of the Stones Throw building, and back in the day, the intent was, well, the land it's adjacent to was town-owned parking lot with the expectation that we were likely to put a parkade on it, but it wasn't going to be that tall. And okay, so there's no paper about that. There's no restrictive covenants, whatever. And the town probably would not have put a restrictive covenant on its own property anyway. But the thing that was really kind of influencing me was that this development at the old fire hall site, we collected a lot of money from the development for the amenity fund. And the amenity fund is supposed to get spent on essentially making the development more compatible with the neighborhood, dealing with the problems. So I was looking at this as we actually received quite a lot of money from this development to solve problems the development might create in the immediate area. And this is pretty obviously one. So I felt it was reasonable for us to spend the money on it, because it is the money that came from the development. And yes, it's in the town's coffers now, but the money was collected to solve problems that the development creates in the area, among other things. I mean, you can use it for other amenities, but that is really one of the major objectives of that amenity contribution. Anyway, that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? I have Councillors Fallett, O'Keefe, and Garnett opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. We'll now move to item 13F, the Peninsula Fire and Emergency Program Mutual Aid Agreement Renewal. Report from staff dated the 18th. I turn to staff for a brief introduction. Good evening, Chief.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Staff before you this evening recommends an up to a 1-year extension of our existing fire and emergency management mutual aid agreement with North and Central Saanich. Our existing agreement, it's quite dated. The 3 Peninsula Chiefs have met on a number of occasions, and there's a number of items that require revision. Unfortunately, our agreement expires on February 22nd, and we just require some additional time to make sure we get it right and modernize and update the agreement as it should be.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the Chief before we... Councillor O'Keefe.
So that's good. I like the clarification that it was up to 1 year, because as I read the motion, I was uncertain just because the last bit of phrasing says, or until a new agreement is brought forward for council's consideration. So that made it kind of sound like it might go on for a while. So in making the recommendation, if I have your intention correctly, I might just change the wording to say the mutual aid agreement be renewed for up to 1 year. Would that be acceptable? Would that capture your intent?
Yeah, through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, yes, that very much exactly articulates what we're trying to achieve. I don't anticipate it'll take a year. Our intent is we're all in the midst of budget as everyone else is, and we're probably going to take a 1-month pause, and then we'll get back into this. And my hope is that we could have something before you sometime in the summer, and that's my intent. But definitely before the end of the year, or 12 months. That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none. Thank you, Chief. We have a recommendation.
So I'll move the recommendation that the Peninsula Fire and Emergency Program Mutual Aid Agreement be renewed for up to 1 year to February 22nd, or until a new agreement is brought forward for Council's consideration.
Second.
Second, any further discussion? Councillor Garnett.
Just a point of clarity, you meant to say February of 2022, right? You said February 22nd.
Yeah, I thought I said February 2022.
No. Now you have.
Okay, good.
Sounds
Thanks,
good.
thanks for catching that.
Just a question through to the chief, if I may. How long has the mutual aid agreements been in place amongst the municipalities? And second part is, has the pandemic and the particularly when the EOCs were in operation brought further discussion into these future agreements?
Yes, those are good questions, and honestly, the mutual aid agreements, specifically for fire and PMO, they predate my time in the fire department. So I believe that they were, put together in the early '90s. But again, it predates my joining the fire department in 1996. But we've had a mutual aid agreement with North and Central Saanich since those times. In respect to our response to COVID. We had, when we were at an EOC level 2, we were having almost daily check-ins with our neighbors in North and Central Saanich. And then as we've kind of weaned back to a level 1, it's been more of a weekly basis. And the deputy chief participates almost in daily conference calls with provincial health officers, as well as those provided by the various ministries and the CRD. And they provide environments where all municipalities can kind of call in and discuss where they're at. So there's been a lot of involvement and engagement from an emergency management perspective throughout our pandemic response.
Great, thank you. Any further questions? I'll call the question. All in favor? None opposed. Motion carries. Thank you. And I'll turn to, the next on the agenda, we don't need an introduction. Status update on council action items and a report from the CAO dated January 20th. We have a recommendation.
I'll move the recommendation number 1, that resolution from 28th of October 2019, staff directed to further investigate the steps to declare Sydney's downtown core smoke and vape free be rescinded. And number 2, that the report be received for information.
Second.
Any discussion? Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Just a question to staff. I'm looking at the information about the short-term rentals and some comments there about contracting a company. I think I recall that the contractor had been already hired, and I know I just bring it up because it is something that's come up several times in the past year with our business community, our hotels especially, about this, and I wonder if they have any further information on that.
I'll turn to staff.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through to Councillor O'Keefe. Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe, for bringing this one up. I think it was a bit of an oversight on my part when I was putting this together, because indeed, we have hired a consultant to deal with this, so that has occurred. I'm happy to say that staff have informed me that we've made some good progress to date, working with our bylaw enforcement officer through the consultant in terms of addressing illegal short-term rentals, in particular in apartment buildings, so we've reached out. Most of those legal rentals have been contacted and mostly resolved. Quite frankly, and we're not sure if it's based on COVID or not, but at the end of the day, there were really only 9 or 10 of these that needed to be resolved once we started looking into it. As well, rentals listed on short-term rental websites are mostly legal now due to the minimum length of stay. So we looked at that within the zoning bylaw. I believe it's about 30 days is what the number of days is for that. So staff are now working on a way to separate legal from illegal short-term rentals that are contained within suites in single-family homes, and send letters out to those illegal ones. So again, the numbers of illegal suites we feel aren't as high as potentially originally projected. So that's some positive news, and I'm not sure if Ms. Clary has any additional information beyond what I presented.
No, thank you.
And just a follow-up, if I may. When we talk about resolved, so that 9 or 10 were resolved, so does that mean that they're no longer renting them out as illegal suites, that they sort of ceased and desisted, or were they fined? I'm just wondering what that means.
Sure. Mr. Humble, would you like me to take this one?
Sure, please, Jen.
Okay, yeah, through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe. So for the most part, they either, we didn't issue any fines related to this. People either changed their listing to be over the 30-day minimum requirement, or they took their listing off the market and either sold it or put it into the long-term rental pool. So.
Right. Okay, good. That's great. Thanks very much for that.
Thank you for the questions, and to Mr. Humble and Ms. Clary. Councillor Rentoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With respect to the item that's suggested be rescinded, I understand that, some practicalities and concerns with that were addressed early on in discussion on that item. My recollection is it was with an aim to address things like litter, cigarette butts on our retail street, secondhand smoke, and just that the downtown core experience. It's still something that I would like to have seen us look at further, and so I'm not necessarily motivating my colleagues to feel differently with respect to the motion that's before us, but I won't support it. Thank you.
Councillor O'Keefe for a second time.
Thank you. Just seeking a bit of clarity on the first page at the bottom about the bicycle racks. And so it mentions that this is going to be addressed when an active transportation plan is developed, which I kind of understood is far down the road. But then it mentions a 2021 item in the budget for some interesting downtown bike storage. So are we thinking that we will be able to do some bike storage then in 2021? Or are we waiting for the active transportation plan? I'm just looking for clarity on that.
Turn to that.
Through the mayor, there was already a budget item for 2020 to install a covered bike storage facility. That wasn't done because the model we settled on was going to cost more, so we'll be bringing forward an enhanced budget item for 2021.
So the plan is then that we will get some covered bike storage in 2021, and we won't necessarily wait for the active transportation plan? Am I understanding that correctly?
If approved by council, yes.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you.
Stay tuned for budget deliberations. I'm sorry, did we have a motion? We didn't have. We did move it and second it. Yeah. I just want to comment that I want to thank Mr. Humble for putting this together, and I know staff assisted as well. It's greatly appreciated. This is an important document for council, and I think for staff as well. It's part of the reporting mechanism, reporting process. When you look at this, some 40 outstanding council action items in this report, combined with over 100 capital projects through the year, and the things that come onto our plate, town's plate on a regular basis, I think it facilitates and helps in the overall staff planning and in helping council address priorities as well. So just want to thank staff for that. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? We have one opposed. Councillor O'Toole, the motion carries. Thank you. And so I'll turn to item 13H, which is a monthly building report.
Who received for information?
Any discussion? All those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. And we'll now turn to correspondence. And under item 14A, we have a letter from Cascadia Seaweed dated January 7th, which is a request to include seaweed farming in our zoning bylaw. And we have a recommendation.
I'll move we refer this to staff for a report.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. This is, I mean, it's just kind of an interesting housekeeping item, though I did notice that the depth that she was looking at for requiring for seaweed was substantially more. Just looking at our Beacon Wharf, the depth assessments, and as Councillor Wainwright was speaking of earlier, the fact that if we have a floating wharf, we would need to dredge during low tide to let the thing settle down without striking the bottom. I'm not sure if there's anywhere within the town marine leases where we'd actually have the depth for seaweed growing, but perhaps there'd be infrastructure required for operations somewhere else. So I don't see any reason off the bat not to have it. I'm just not sure if it will help, but I'm glad to see the staff report because it's just kind of an intriguing idea for a new industry in the town.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. Any further comment? Call a question. All in favor? None opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. And we'll turn to item 14B, which is a request, a letter from Farmlands Trust Society dated January 10th, which is a request for COVID-19 safe restart funding for their food redistribution program. And staff has provided 3 options to us. Councillor, I'm sorry, I didn't see whether Councillor Duncan or Wainwright was first. If you saw
Paper, rock, scissors.
Councillor Duncan.
All right. I was going to refer to the 2021 budget.
Do we have a seconder? We have it seconded for discussion. Did you wish to motivate Councillor Duncan?
From my perspective, this is just one of those things that I know early in the pandemic, I was bringing up that food security and increasing local food security, I think is just a good disaster preparedness response. We know that food bank use has gone up, and Victoria has been dealing with an awful lot of housing of our homeless population. We have less of that to do, so this is one way we could contribute at least towards feeding, because I know they refer to most of this food not being on the peninsula, but instead going down to Victoria. But I would like to see it in the budget, because I think it's an important way we could contribute to food security. Though I do realize that it may not be a priority for the peninsula, but that's what I got.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright, then Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess I don't really have an issue discussing it at budget, but I was actually going to make a motion to deny it. And my reason for it is that it's essentially a one-of grant request. There are a lot of other bona fide nonprofit charities that are operating in the same sector that have not approached us. And this, I guess part of me is thinking, they probably noticed the request from North Saanich for applications to help them spend their Safe Restart grant, and simply sent essentially the same package to us because, why not? We could possibly see quite a few more requests like this. And it's I guess if we're going to treat it as a grant, it should go through our grant and aid. Otherwise, I guess I'd prefer to support one of our local, something like the food bank. Anyway, I would have been comfortable simply denying it now.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe, then myself.
Thank you. I had some difficulties with this just because it didn't really have the information that I needed to make a decision on it. They're asking for $35,000, but I presume that they've gone to North Saanich and Central Saanich as well. So, I don't know if they want that full amount from us. I don't see a budget. I also noted that, they talked about they harvested and shared food worth over $24,000, which is good. But so they want us to pay $35,000 to provide $24,000 worth of food. So I wasn't really understanding that. I might be willing to consider it if it went through the grant and aid program, because I think that's where it should go if it's going to be considered at all. That way, I would be asking staff to respond to them to say, if you want this, fill out the application, give us the financial statements and all the other things. But I could also just let it go nowhere and reject it now as well. I go either way. So, but I don't think it should go directly to budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. My comments are, I think this is kind of introducing a couple of new lenses, or a new lens, and that is the fact that they're applying for COVID restart funds. And while we've had a presentation from staff shortly after it was announced that these funds were made available to us, we haven't, and there will be staff reports coming, presentations coming during budget deliberations and presentations. The fact that there are various impacts in our community, food security being one, as a result of the COVID pandemic. And I don't think it's unreasonable for organizations of various types, and this happens to be one, to come forward indicating how the pandemic has affected them, or the opportunity for that organization given the circumstances of the pandemic. And as I read this application, and I should disclose that the applicant did contact me in advance, and the application has, or the information has gone to the other two councils, is that food security is an issue, and we have increased use at our food banks as a result of the pandemic. And that the food banks are interested in fresh produce. I asked the question, was any of the produce from Newman Farm going to the Peninsula Food Bank? And the answer is no today, but there have been some discussions. What they're looking for the monies for, as indicated in the lengthy letter, is they're looking to farm additional, to expand the farmed land. They have additional space there. I was with the other mayors on the peninsula, and Adam Olson had a tour of Newman Farms a year ago, the summer I think, or a couple of years ago, and they do have additional space, and they have good experience since they began several years ago, and there is the opportunity to expand, but there is going to be some costs associated with expanding the amount of produce. So I don't think it's a matter of staying at the same level of produce production. I think it's them wanting to increase and consider providing produce to other agencies such as the Peninsula Food Bank. I agree that some additional information could have been provided that would have been helpful to me and my colleagues. For example, are they requesting $35,000 or are they requesting 1/3 of $35,000? But I think moving it forward to budget deliberation is reasonable, given we have yet to hear what all requests will be coming forward. The comment about going to grants and aid, I think at some point we're going to have to give discussion, and likely during budget discussions, with regards to apportioning COVID relief funds to smaller organizations that come forward. I can see this happening over the next 1 to 2 years from various organizations based on COVID impacts. So I'm supportive of it going forward to budget deliberations, but I would subsequently recommend requesting certain information from the applicant for our budget discussions. Turn to Councillor Rintoul and then Councillor Fallot.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I concur with your comments with respect to the possibility of seeing more applications with respect to the COVID-19 Safe Restart grant funds. Councillor Wainwright noted that as well, and so referring this to budget, I think gives us some time to look to perhaps an avenue to expand upon, or have a program in place where applications of this nature may well be fielded. Having said that, I concur with Councillor O'Keefe with respect to the some of the missing information here, and you pointed out yourself as well, Mr. Mayor, is that $35,000 from Sydney or 1/3 of that. Let's see the financials as part of the application, and so I don't know if staff would encourage the motion to be revised to include a request for further information from this applicant. Or if staff's takeaway from this is that they should write and request that in preparation for budget deliberations. But I'll continue to support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to staff of a comment. Addition for a motion if we do choose to request additional information. I mean, from our committee meeting, you brought forward additional arts information. That was without resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Honestly, where I can envision this going is if council truly has interest in setting up a grant program from Safe Restart funds similar to North Saanich, we would want to establish some parameters and then consider this likely post-budget because there simply wouldn't be enough time to give it proper analysis. And I would further advise that it not be dealt with as a one-off if you're considering such a program, and that it be considered with a number of other potential applicants at a set date so that you can fully consider who deserves what percentage of the funds you allocate.
Thank you, Mr. Hisik. And I think, for budget deliberations or budget discussions is that, do you set up a program, or given the nature of COVID, do you respond on an application by application basis? But I'll leave that to further discussion. I did have Councillor Fallot next and then Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the comments that have been made by my colleagues and certainly your input, Mr. Mayor. I support this because this is about food production, and that is different than supporting the food bank, which I certainly am in full agreement with supporting our food bank. But this is talking about food production, and it's on the peninsula, and I'm pleased to hear that you have had some preliminary discussion with them, at least, or some happen chance discussion about whether or not they are supplying our food bank. I think that is something that does need to be fleshed out. So I'm happy to see this go to budget. I would like to consider this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Yeah, as I said before, I'm fine to consider it, but I need some more information. And I guess also what I'm wondering is, why can't we just refer this request to grants and aid? I would suggest that staff respond to them to say, fill out the paperwork, and we will consider it under our grants and aid program. So I'm just not sure why staff are recommending that we would have to come up with a separate program and do things later. Often with grants and aid during budget time, it's my recollection in the past is if we wanted to boost the amount at that time, we could. And if we just referred things like this to grants and aid, then there's a set process, there's set information. And I'm just wondering if that isn't a viable option.
Okay, if I might respond, Councillor, and I can certainly allow staff the opportunity to respond, is that the grant and aid program has a funding source. And we have a situation where an organization has come forward specifically for the COVID restart funds, requesting COVID restart funds. We haven't directed COVID restart funds to the grants and aid program. We haven't had discussion whether we would create a separate program such as North Saanich did. I think there's consensus tonight that we want to have that discussion during our budget discussions. But I don't think, I mean, you could choose to just refer to grants and aid and not consider it a COVID funds request, but the nature of the request is specifically COVID funds. I'll leave it to staff if they wish to comment otherwise. Okay, thank you. Seeing no further speakers, or sorry, Councillor Duncan, please go ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, you addressed part of what I was going to say, but I think I just wanted to kind of loop back to what Mr. Hissick said earlier about whether that his recommendation would be not to consider this as part of our regular budget, but to look at establishing a separate kind of grant and aid program using our COVID-19 restart funds, similar to what North Saanich did, which would be probably the best course for this. This is our grant and aid program would be swamped by this request, whether it's a third of it or the full 35,000. Obviously, we would not give them remotely what they were asking for if we had to come out of our current grant and aid budget. So I'm just wondering, by referring it to the 2021 budget, and if staff feels we're going to get more requests and this should be dealt with in a separate pot outside of the regular budget and kind of within a grant and aid program for that, whether that is something that staff can simply take and move out of the budget and into kind of a separate recommendation that comes out of the budgeting and to be dealt with afterwards, or whether we should modify the recommendation or the movement that I'm making here, the motion that I'm making here.
Mr. Hissick.
I think I can deal with it as is based on what I've heard.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Thanks, Mr. Hissick. Seeing no further speakers, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. We'll turn to item 14C, which is a request for funding COVID-19 related expenses. A letter from a letter from the Saanich Peninsula Chamber of Commerce dated January 18th, and similar to the last, we have staff have provided options to approve, refer to budget, or deny. Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that we approve it.
Second.
Discussion? I'll give Councillor Wainwright an opportunity to motivate.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Really brief. The Chamber was invaluable during our response to the pandemic. This is a really small amount of money. Even if it wasn't going to be well spent, I think they deserve this small amount of money given what they did, but this is going to be well spent.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Duncan?
Yeah, this is so important. The importance of having public washrooms has been brought up in the pandemic so much, especially for our tradespeople. There's got to be people out there with kidney problems now. I think the only thing that I'm a little bit miffed about, even though it's a very small amount of money, is knowing how much Sydney put forward to keep bathrooms open, to keep washrooms open throughout the pandemic. And North Saanich I feel did not contribute equally. And when they got their COVID-19 restart money, said they had so little infrastructure to have to maintain that they were going to start giving it away for charity. So I feel North Saanich maybe could have pitched in a little bit more for washrooms here, but I'm not going to deny funding to the Peninsula Chamber, given the way they've stepped up to supply this much needed facility. All I have to say about that.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. Any further discussion? Just a question to the staff. Any concern, or does staff need to indicate that this would come from COVID restart funds?
That is our understanding.
Thank you. I'll call the question. All in favor? None opposed. Motion carries. Thank you. And we'll turn to item 14D, which is the letter from the Capital Regional District dated January 18th with regards to CRD bylaw number 4391, the Saanich Peninsula Waterways Environmental Action Service Establishment Bylaw number 1, 2020. And we have a recommendation from staff. Would staff like to introduce?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, this was based on a previous resolution from council to bring this forward and endorse this proposal. So this is a proposed CRD service establishment bylaw that's being requested by the 3 peninsula municipalities, whereby the CRD would establish Saanich Peninsula Harbors Initiative to help manage our respective harbors, water bodies, and watercourses. And this initiative grew out of the desire for our respective municipalities to try and address really the issue of derelict vessels, illegal moorage, illegal buoys within, in particular, for Sydney and North Saanich, Seaham Harbour, and for Central Saanich, the Brentwood Bay Inlet. And again, I think this is a clear initiative of the 3 municipalities, councils and staffs collaborating on an important project that has been raised numerous times by our respective residents and a really challenging issue as well. It was noted previously that this isn't a silver bullet with respect to addressing derelict vessels, but it's a way forward in the sense that we'll have a leadership organization providing assistance on the overall management and setting priorities.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. And we do have a motion.
I'll move the recommendation that council consent to the CRD adopting bylaw number 4391, Saanich Peninsula Waterways Environmental Action Service Establishment bylaw number 1, 2020.
Second.
Discussion. Councillor O'Keefe.
Yeah, I'm in agreement, of course, but what I was trying to discern is what will be the process to identify concerns. So is this something that, is there a committee that involves members of council or members of the public to bring concerns to the CRD? How do those get action? You know, we had some good ideas from citizens earlier this year about some ideas on how to deal with some of these things. So would those ideas be forwarded to the CRD? What's the process for that?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through to Councillor O'Keefe. Yeah, this would have been a great question to ask in advance, because we could have probably researched this one and provided a lot of detail on it. But it is our understanding that a committee is established, a stakeholder committee is established through the CRD, and we have stakeholder representatives from the 3 municipalities, and they work with the CRD to set the priorities. So a committee is established, essentially.
Okay, yeah, no, that's fine, thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Humboldt. Yes, it's, I think, you know, one of the benefits to this is that the CRD does have experience. They have set up this structure elsewhere in the region with other municipalities, and they have resource in this, and they have experience in engagement and engaging stakeholders, and that will be very helpful to the challenging circumstances we face, particularly since things like Seaham Harbour are in both Sydney and North Saanich. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor? None opposed, the motion carries. Thank you. And we turn to item 14E, a request from funding business development manager. This is further to the presentation we had earlier this evening from the SBIA, and we have a recommendation.
I'll move referral to the 2021 budget deliberations and to the Economic Advisory Committee for comment.
Seconder? Seconded by Councillor Wainwright. Wish to motivate Councillor O'Toole?
No, I think it's just the inclusion, in addition to the recommendation that's there, is the opportunity for the EAC to review the report that was presented this evening to Council, and for the EAC in particular to weigh in on the concept and provide that feedback to Council. If I'm not mistaken, the EAC have a meeting as early as tomorrow, I believe. So it's it should be, although they wouldn't have the advance read, it could well be introduced at least at that meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Further discussion, Councillor O'Keefe?
Yeah, I would have preferred to break up the motion, and I'd be okay with it going to EAC to have their comment. You know, some of the concerns I have about this is, again, it didn't go through EAC. I'm thinking back to 2018 when the SBIA brought forward a proposal, and there was talk about collaboration, that sort of thing, but it completely bypassed EAC, and people were not included in that. So that's a concern. I also like to hear EAC's view in terms of if there's limited amounts that we have to devote to economic development, would they rather see a long-term strategy, or would they rather see this position? And it concerns me somewhat when I hear colleagues saying that doing something is better than nothing. And that concerns me because we've done a whole lot of that over the last few years. The last council and this council included. We have not had put our minds at all to an economic development strategy. And so what we've done over the last several years is we've been dependent on business groups coming forward to us with ideas. And, you know, when I look back at some of those things that we did, things like developing a website, a window wrapping campaign, concierge services. The Chamber did a workshop for home-based businesses and a tour of industry for students. Those last two things we still haven't got a report back on. But when we look back at those things, they're all ad hoc activities, and we have never had sort of an economic vision or a strategy. And so when I look back at those things, you look at those things and say, how did those things help move our business community and our community forward in terms of an economic development strategy? And they haven't. I looked in our OCP that's been around for 14 years. There's only a vague mention of economic development in that. And as I, find out more about what's from staff, what's going to be in our OCP, it's probably going to be about the same. There's not going to be any room for an economic development strategy because there's no time for that. And so, at a time when our business community and economy is in shambles because of COVID, it's our responsibility as a local government to bring the various sectors together, to lead a process, to develop a vision and a strategy. And I guess, I do understand the desire from, the SBIA and colleagues that, well, we have to get on and do something. But I worry that we're going to continue spending money without knowing what value we're getting and without knowing if these are the right things we need to do to move forward. I'd rather go through a process where we engage all of the community, the business community, all sectors, to figure out what is needed. This particular proposal is put together by the SBIA, focused on their clients' needs. And so, yeah, I have some concerns about whether this is the right way ahead for us. I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Councillor Rintoul, did you wish to respond to any of
I
those
do,
comments?
thank you. I just wanted to clarify that certainly from my perspective, this is the way I would expect to see this item move through a process. Terms of reference for the EAC are referrals from council. So council's received a proposal from the SBIA. We are referring to the EAC for comment. So that's normal. That's what we've done since the inception of this EAC. And I look forward to EAC's feedback. You know, I concur to an extent with your comment around, you know, let's just do it because it's here and it's before us. And you cited some other examples, you know, where perhaps that's an approach that may have been taken. But I would argue, you know, we haven't given a commitment, you know, long term to an organization and provided them with maybe the resources they need to see success. And so here's an organization that's put forward a pitch. Granted, you know, my comment was, look, I think this person needs to interface with the EAC and needs to be that contractor that we've considered budgeting for to help develop that economic strategy that Councillor Keith is referring to. So I'm quite comfortable with referring it as per the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no speakers, my comments are that I wouldn't have been surprised if FDBI had made a request for this funding to come from COVID restart funds. The impact of COVID has been significant on the business community. The term shambles isn't necessarily one I would agree with in terms of the state of our local business economy. Certainly there are challenges, and the challenges in certain sectors are very significant. However, we heard tonight in the presentation that they're having 1,200 emails thereabouts a month, and who knows how many phone calls and who knows how many personal interactions, although those are probably reduced in COVID. They are wanting to address the impacts of COVID today. And we also heard from the presenters that this seems to be compatible with development of an economic development strategy. They want to get boots on the ground today, not only for their own, the 350 plus members in the downtown business district, but for the other 500 businesses in Sydney. And it is going to take months to develop a long-term economic development strategy, and the business community needs to react today to the impacts of COVID, as they have been doing and as we've complimented the respective BIA and Chambers of Commerce for doing when they first became involved in the EAC and the EOC. So I think this is very reasonable to move it forward to budget deliberations and make a decision whether to move forward as quickly as possible or not, but also in the interim have it go to EAC as early as tomorrow, and welcome their feedback to in the process as well. But I would like it related, the perspective that I have that I think came out of the presentation, and would ask our liaison to take to EAC, is that this member of council sees it as compatible in terms of moving forward with this business development manager and concurrently moving forward with the development of a long-term economic development strategy. Seeing no further speakers, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. And last, we have 10 items of correspondence, with the late item tonight of correspondence with regards to pickleball courts in Sydney. and we have a recommendation.
I'll refer to the community engagement process.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor? None opposed, motion carries. Thank you. We have no new business, and we have several items under correspondence for information.
Move receipt.
Second.
All in favor? None opposed, motion carries. No notices of motion. We have a motion to go in camera.
I'll move that it is in the opinion of council that the public interest requires that persons other than members of council and officers be excluded from the meeting to consider a confidential matter relating to a land and privacy issue and a personnel issue pursuant to section 90.1 A, E, and J of the community charter, and that council continue the meeting in closed session.
Did I hear a second? I'm sorry.
Second.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. All those in favor? None opposed, motion carries, and a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved and
Second.
seconded. All in favor? Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, staff. We'll recess for